Milton claims to justify the ways of God to man, and Mephistopheles sets out to demolish that claim. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I am continuing what I call my Western core series with Goethe's Faust. That is Faust by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. The Faust legend, of course, was not coined or thought up by Goethe, and in fact it had been treated previously, notably by Christopher Marlowe, and then treated subsequently Thomas Mann. And actually, it's going to be treated again here at the beginning of 2026 with Karl Ove Knausgård's latest book. I can't remember exactly what it's called. I think it's called The Night School, but it itself is based on the Faust legend. So it's been treated an awful lot. But this one is situated in what I call my Western core. And for those of you who haven't heard me talk about this or watched any of the other associated videos, all I mean by Western core is that this is sort of a list that comes out of my own personal challenge to come up with a dozen or so books. So I'm trying to keep it very, very limited. I think early on my thinking was that this could be a group of books that could be read in 1 year and then reread kind of continuously throughout one's life. But these books to me represent the dozen or so books that I think are most crucial to have a conversational or beyond understanding of in order to enhance your experience of all other literature. And remember, this is Western core. So they're just simply the books that I think as you continue to read, they inform and have influenced and have intertextual connections with so much other literature. I mean, we are starting to stray from it now. There are lots of writers hitting the scene who are not so familiar with the Western canon or the core Western canon. You know, there's been a lot done to sort of deride and defenestrate just the idea of a canon. And, you know, parts of that do make sense, especially when you get into sort of like the canon dictators and things like that. But I don't think we should, as usual, we shouldn't just throw everything out because there is some good to it. Now, for me, I tend to read stuff that maybe isn't so new. I don't stay up on a lot of new literature, and you know, a lot of the literature that I read that isn't part of the Western core, those authors were very well versed in these core works, and so it just, since it informed them, it seemed right to make sure that I was informed about them. So anyway, I'm belaboring the point here. Where we are in the canon now, or sorry, yeah, I said canon when I'm trying to avoid it. Here we are in the list now with Goethe and with Faust in particular. One thing about Faust is now where we are, we've gone through Homer and Dante and Shakespeare, Milton, and what's so amazing is that all these works are sort of connected. You know, all these authors are informing each other. And what they're effectively doing is building out this story of Western literature and Western culture. And so Faust, especially in part two, it brings in everything that we've read up to this point. So as you're reading through this list now with Faust, it's like everything is being reused and reimagined. Like he's incorporating Homer and beyond the list, of course. Now we've got Ovid in the mix and Virgil and so on, which people, you know, have pointed out that, man, how in the world can you leave out Ovid and Virgil and so on? And all I can say is that I'm trying to be extremely selective to keep the list manageable. But anyway, and as we go on, like when we get to Joyce's Ulysses, we'll see that he, sort of like Goethe, is weaving his own fabric out of these threads handed down by the predecessors. Anyway, it's funny because I was only going to do part one because part two is notoriously difficult. It's crazy. You could say that it's all over the place, and sort of like how I only did the Inferno of the Divine Comedy instead of also doing Purgatorio and Paradiso. I regret that. Like, I need to go back and treat the whole Commedia. And likewise, coming up on Proust, I'm only going to do Swann's Way. But really, you can't take just the first one in both of those cases. And I realized after I read part one here, I felt so unsatisfied. And I realized, like, while this is a great opening to the tragedy, nothing's resolved. And even, the whole wager, the double wager, there are two wagers. Neither of them is resolved. And so you can't really just read the first one. So originally, I just wanted to bring attention to this new translation from Deep Vellum of Faust Part 1. This is a translation by Zsuzsanna Ozsváth and Frederick Turner. By the way, I looked into Zsuzsanna Ozsváth, and she is like 90 years old and a Holocaust survivor. I think was taught at the University of Texas. But just amazing to think that someone, a Holocaust survivor in her 90s, informed this new translation. And then also Frederick Turner. And I just thought that was really neat. And I was just going to really highlight this and focus on part one. But again, it's just so incomplete without going on to part two. So I looked at a couple of different translations, and I decided to go with David Luke. He is an award-winning translator for part one. He's also translated part one. His translation of part one and part two are both available from Oxford Classics. Those of you who know could probably already tell that from the look of these things. But this is a wonderful translation with an incredible long, like 70-page introduction. That's a wonderful work of criticism and scholarship in its own right. So I thought, let me make things right in this video, and I will do the whole of Faust. So we're treating all of Faust, not just part one. And then, when I finished Faust part two, I thought to myself, I'm gonna try to seek out some other criticism besides my normal avenues of seeking out critical treatments. And I found these 7 essays by Alan P. Cottrell. And it's published in this paperback as part of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill Studies in Germanic Languages and Literatures. And it's 7 essays on Faust. And this ended up being just one of those rare treats where I felt like this has found a great, it's hard to say, I want to say it's found a great middle ground between sort of appealing to a very wide and non-academic audience, but then also making sure that it asserts its scholarly stripes as well, if that makes any sense. I guess to say that it's accessible yet also respectable scholarship. But anyway, I got a lot out of these essays, and especially the textual analysis, the sort of new criticism style formalist textual analysis that's done on the original German. was a real treat. So I'm going to share that. I was going to stop there. But then something started nagging at me. And part of it was that in these essays, Cottrell resorts to the conversations between Goethe and Eckermann. And I've had this book, The Conversations of Goethe with Johann Peter Eckermann. I've had this book on my shelf, I don't even know how long. I mean, years and years, over 10 years easily. And I've known of its status. I've known that it's kind of grouped in there with what Boswell did for Johnson, and just grouped in there with great literary, artistic conversations in general. And I was going to shy away from it because I didn't want the video to get too bloated or for me to take on too much and then feel overwhelmed. But I just decided that there was an element of this video pertaining to who Goethe was. Most of us know his stature, just, from cultural gleanings, that this is, Goethe was a giant of his time and beyond. And I thought, okay, well, let me just dip into it, right? Now, what happened was that I went from wanting to make a video that highlighted this new translation of Part 1 of Faust, put out by the great Deep Vellum. And it kind of went from that to this book taking the spotlight, to be honest. I loved reading this book. Like, I hold it here and wish that I were still reading it. And I felt sad at the end. First of all, it's the last 10 years of Goethe's life is when Eckermann met him. He came to just meet his hero, and then ended up kind of staying there in Weimar for the last 10 years of Goethe's life, and getting very close and handling his last publications and all kinds of things, and recording these great conversations. So I felt this sense of loss, not only because of it recording those last 10 years and the death of Goethe, but also I felt very much that Goethe was alive, really comes to life in these conversations. And a lot of people apparently have felt this when reading Eckermann's conversations. And so I think this is a great way to get more acquainted with this polymathic wunderkind that is Goethe. So we'll actually start here to get a sense of who Goethe was and where his proclivities took him. Then we'll move into part 1 and then part 2 of Faust, which, look, even though it's notoriously difficult, it is very, very rich and very rewarding. And then finally, we'll finish it off with these critical essays to take us a little deeper. So without further ado, let's get going with the Conversations of Goethe with Johann Peter Eckermann. And there's an introduction by Havelock Ellis. The journal goes, like I said, the last 10 years of Goethe's life, so from 1823 to 1832. When they first meet, I think it's notable that Eckermann is 31 years old and Goethe is 74. So this is very much the ephebe and the sage. And really, to be honest with you, there was a lot of it that struck a personal chord because it reminded me a lot of my own conversations with Michael Silverblatt. And while we didn't quite have this much of an age gap, it was close. And so much of it was me just kind of listening and taking in. But anyway, it stays very close to the subject in a more journalistic mode. But Eckermann, he really can write. And I just recorded this one And he talks about this is when the Weimar theater caught on fire. Horrific incident. But he says, the fire raged upwards as before, and threw up to the dark sky an inexhaustible mass of glowing sparks and burning particles of light materials, which then, with a light breeze, passed sideways over the town. So that is to say that while most of it is more journalistic and just sort of capturing the conversations and just giving us quick little contexts. You'll notice how many times he says dined with Goethe or had dinner with Goethe or something like that. He just sort of quickly sets it up and then it's on to the subject at hand. But when he does take a moment to set the scene or capture something, you'll see that he was a great writer in his own right. Havelock Ellis, he does a great job in his introduction, sort of elevating Eckermann's reputation and highlighting his unique qualification for this task. And if you want sort of a glimpse of Eckermann's sentiment, we can glean it from this here. He says, I am neither by education nor by habit fitted for general society. My situation in earlier days was such that I feel as if I had never lived till I came near you, meaning near Goethe. All is new to me. Every evening at the theater, every conversation with you this is great, marks an era in my existence. Every conversation with you, Goethe, marks a new era, a new epoch in my existence. Things perfectly indifferent to persons of different education and habits make the deepest impression on me. And as the desire of instructing myself is great, my mind seizes on everything with energy and draws from it as much nourishment as possible. It is a great folly to hope that other men will harmonize with us. I have never hoped this. For it is... Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. I'll stop there. Yeah, like I said, he's in a unique situation where he's just sort of primed to take in every little nuance of what Goethe is dispensing. Now, as you might be thinking, if you're just taking the surface of all this and you haven't read it yourself or know more than I do, which most people know more than I do. This was all new to me when I read it, so let me not come off so pompous. But to label this as a hagiography would be to overlook Eckermann's earnestness to capture the full man. And in fact, he captures his own objections to, for example, the theory of colors, which the theory of colors is really sort of Goethe's life work. He poured everything into that and considered that his most important work. And he's very touchy on the subject. We'll get into it a little bit later. But he really felt strongly that he had struck upon something that no one else had struck upon. More than just refuting the Newtonian conception of color theory and offering his own. But he really, really saw this as groundbreaking and something that he would have to leave to posterity to eventually discover. And it is still an open topic, although it has been shunned in the scientific community by and large. It is starting to kind of come on the scene again. And it encompasses so many other facets other than just hard science. And that's what has been difficult for people to grasp. But even so, and knowing all of this, Eckermann does present his own objections to Goethe about some of his assertions in the theory of colors, and does ruffle Goethe's feathers and records that, he believed that Goethe might have been a bit blinded in some areas. So all that to say that he does capture the whole man, and he doesn't leave any of, it contains warts and all, right? Yeah, so let's move into Havelock Ellis's introduction. Comes right off the scene by quoting Nietzsche. I believe this is from Human All Too Human, his collection of aphorisms. The best German book there is. And he was referring to Eckermann's conversations with Goethe. So, pretty good proponent there. And then Ellis kind of draws this lineage of people who have captured the life of a great sage, who were in an inferior position, starting with the writing of the Gospels, the writers of the Gospels capturing Jesus, Plato capturing Socrates, as I said earlier, Boswell with Dr. Johnson, and now Eckermann with Goethe. He says he was not a secretary. Eckermann was not a secretary, which Goethe already had, but a helper and collaborator. And he liked to think himself, as was indeed inscribed on his own grave, Goethe's friend. So that shows you kind of how deep his compassion went. But indeed, he was a helper and a collaborator. As these conversations really capture, they discussed everything. And Goethe really put a lot on Eckermann to help assemble his complete works. Not only to capture and record everything, but to assemble them in certain orders and into certain volumes, and kind of decide what was worthy and what wasn't, and so on. Ellis tells us that Eckermann's life was rather troubled. He wanted to be a writer. His parents pushed him to do other things. It's kind of this classic 18th century, early 19th century story. And then, he wants to get married. This girl's not sure he's stable enough or will be able to financially support her enough. Then, of course, after they marry and he gets totally infatuated with Goethe, that brings a wedge in there. He's just obsessed with Goethe and spending all his time, enmeshed in that. And then on top of that, once this book did come out, Ellis tells us that it made no great stir on its appearance, either at home or abroad. But it was received with full approval by those whose good opinion was best worth having. So, I kind of, this goes back again to, and I'm thinking about the prologue in the theater already in part 1 of Faust, with the director and the actor and the poet, and they're kind of debating what kind of play this should be. The director, of course, wants it to have wide appeal, mass market appeal, and bring in lots of money. Whereas the poet just wants to strike at something sublime and meaningful. And who cares if it even appeals to anyone? So it's always that road. Would you rather be a #1 New York Times bestseller and see your book in paperback at grocery stores and airports, and everybody's reading it, and it gets turned into a Netflix miniseries? Or do you want to sort of be a blip, an ephemeral blip on some other lesser radar, but the handful of people with very refined and discerning tastes appreciate you? These seem to be the antipodes. And Goethe was well aware of them as well. But anyway, they realized that Eckermann's cult of Goethe was balanced by his sound judgment and scrupulous honesty, while his eager receptivity and his many-sided interests enabled him to view the various aspects of Goethe's complex nature better than those who approached him with specialized mental outfits. And that is a very eloquent statement of why Eckermann was so well endowed for this. He has molded the portrait by which we all best know the greatest modern figure in the world of the spirit, and it is due to Eckermann that Goethe is commonly regarded as an Olympian. When we wish to come near to Goethe, it is the Goethe of the final stage we seek, and therefore we must go to Eckermann. So it's the Goethe of those last 10 years, basically. And just for those who care, this editor's preface makes clear that this is based on an earlier abridgment in English. This is not an abridgment of that abridgment. It is the full text of that abridgment. In abridging Eckermann's conversations with Goethe, the principle observed has been to omit nothing of Goethe's except mere formality. So we're assured that we have everything that Goethe said that Eckermann recorded. At the same time, everything of interest in the remarks of other members of the circle has been preserved. Nearly 1/8 of the original bulk has been got rid of by chastening Eckermann's extreme verbosity and what he himself might have consented to call his own subjectiveness. So we're assured kind of that we're getting the cream of the creme de la creme here. All right, so that's it for the front matter. Let's get into my highlights of the conversations proper. The world is so great and rich, and life so full of variety, that you can never want occasions for poems, but they all must be occasioned. That is to say, reality must give both impulse and material. So this is Goethe speaking. And so already you kind of see this mind full of curiosity and patience and observation, and then finally poetry. So I think, just to sum it up, that's the best way that I can describe my own personal reflection of who Goethe was. Thoreau comes to mind, and in fact the American Transcendentalists loved Goethe, notably Ralph Waldo Emerson. He tells Eckermann at one point, throw aside the book if it displeases you. So if you ever feel bad about DNFing a book, just remember that Goethe said it's okay. Goethe earnestly advised me to do so, learn English, that is, particularly on account of Lord Byron, saying that a character of such eminence had never existed before and probably would never come again. And yes, Goethe revered Byron. You stand now at that point where you must break through to the high and difficult part of art. This is Goethe counseling Eckermann. Apprehension of what is individual. You must do some violence to yourself to get out of the idea. So I love this. This is almost like this reminds me of why this is sometimes grouped with the letters of Rilke to the young poet. It was contrary to my nature to talk over my poetic plans with anybody, even with Schiller. So Schiller and Goethe were incredible friends. And I brought this up before, but Andrea Wolf's book, Magnificent Rebels, which is all about the invention of the self and the romanticism coming out of Germany, with mainly with the group there in Jena, and then their sort of grandfather Goethe coming over from Weimar, captures a lot about Goethe and Schiller. Anyway, what was I saying? It was contrary to my nature to talk over my poetic plans with anyone, even with Schiller. I carried everything about with me in silence, and usually nothing was known to anyone till the whole was complete. So again, that patience, brooding, gestation. Eckermann now. We then spoke upon religious subjects and the abuse of the divine name. People treat it, said Goethe, as if that incomprehensible and most high being, who is even beyond the reach of thought, were only their equal. If they were impressed by his greatness, they would be dumb and through veneration unwilling to name him. So, yeah, Goethe and religion is really interesting. And Goethe was just very syncretic. He was a synthesis of so many different Eastern and Western influences. But for Goethe, there is a God, but he cannot be known. He can only be gleaned in part, and just the greatness. It just totally transcends what we can achieve here on Earth. Is what he's getting at. Here we go. This is Goethe speaking. Shakespeare has already exhausted the whole of human nature in all its tendencies, in all its heights and depths, and that, in fact, there remains for him, the aftercomer, nothing more to do. So sort of like Virginia Woolf said, what's left to do now after she read Proust? Goethe's pretty much saying the same thing. Like, what could we possibly cover now? Shakespeare has covered everything. And it's also, reminds me of the Shakespeare, The Invention of the Human by Harold Bloom. And, reading through these conversations reminded me so much of what I've read by Harold Bloom. It can't, it's clearly not coincidental that so much of Bloom's thinking and things that I've gleaned from him appear here in these early conversations. Eckermann brings up the fact that Napoleon pointed out a passage to Goethe in The Sorrows of Young Werther. It doesn't come off the tongue very easily for me. Werther. The Sorrows of Young Werther, which it appeared to him would not stand a strict examination. Napoleon read The Sorrows of Young Werther many times and apparently carried it around in his campaign library. And in 1808, Goethe was summoned to the great emperor. And when they met again, apparently they met again later, Goethe was awarded the Cross of the Legion of Honor. So, pretty incredible. He often, meaning Goethe, often busies himself with Raphael in order to keep up intercourse with what is best. And if you had to choose one from art, one from music, and one from literature that emblematized Goethe's triumvirate of artistic geniuses, it would be Raphael in art, it would be Mozart for music, and it would be Lord Byron for literature. I am a living witness. This is great. I like this passage. This gives you an idea of the time in which Goethe lived and grew up and what was going on around him. I am a living witness of the 7 Years' War, of the separation of America from England, of the French Revolution, and of the whole Napoleonic era, with the downfall of that hero and the events that followed. I mean, crazy times, right? And that reminds me of how much I want to get around to reading these memoirs Beyond the Grave of Chateaubriand, because he lived through a lot of that. And by the way, NYRB is putting out a 3rd volume this year, and there's going to be a 4th eventually. So pretty cool. Keep your eyes on that. I would by no means dispense with the happiness of believing in a future existence, and would indeed say with Lorenzo de' Medici that those are dead, even for this life, who hope for no other. But such incomprehensible matters lie too far off to be a theme of daily speculation. Let him who believes in immortality enjoy his happiness in silence. He has no reason to give himself airs about it. This was a big thing with Goethe. There were certain boundaries he had for intellectual and certainly theological topics, and he felt that we would do better to keep certain things to ourselves, such as here with the belief or non-belief of an afterlife. He says, I should be well pleased if after the close of this life we were blessed with another. Only I hoped I should hereafter meet none of those who had believed in it here. Yeah. That's good. And yeah, he is a funny guy. But an able man who has something regular to do here and must toil and struggle and produce day by day leaves the future world to itself and is active and useful in this. This was big for him. You didn't just sit around and speculate. Like, you had to be active and work at progressing humanity. In other words, Goethe, he didn't want to just be a writer. He didn't want to just be a philosopher. He didn't want to just be this or that, right? He wanted to engage mind, body, and spirit. Mm-hmm. We cannot, continued Goethe, compare these poets with each other without annihilating one by the other. And he's talking about Byron and Tasso. Torquato Tasso. Byron is the burning thorn bush which reduces the holy cedar of Lebanon to ashes. In case you didn't realize that he liked Byron. The great epic poem of the Italian has manifested its fame for centuries, yet with a single line of Don Juan, the whole of Jerusalem delivered could be poisoned. Wow. Let's see. Goethe laughed at these words. Really, said he, I would not have advised you to undertake Faust. It is mad stuff and goes quite beyond all ordinary feeling. But since you have done it of your own accord without asking my advice, you will see how you will get through it. Faust is so strange an individual that only few can sympathize with his internal condition. Then the character of Mephistopheles is, on account of his irony, and also because he is a living result of an extensive acquaintance with the world, also very difficult. But you will see what lights open upon you. And that's pretty good advice. Faust is a mad, strange thing. But there's enough there for us all to dive in and see what lights open upon us. Goethe, who in his endeavors to investigate nature would willingly encompass the great whole, capital G, capital W, stands in a disadvantageous position in regard to every scientist of importance who has devoted a whole life to one special object and has mastered a kingdom of endless details. Goethe lives more in the contemplation of great universal laws, hence always upon the track of some great synthesis, but, from the want of knowledge of single facts, lacking confirmation of his presentiments, he seizes upon and retains every connection with important scientists. For in them he finds what he himself wants. He will be 80 in a few years, but he is not tired of inquiries and experiments. In none of his tendencies has he come to a standstill. He is still learning and learning, a man endowed with perpetual, imperishable youth. Wow. I hope that when I'm pushing 80, the same could be said of me. But that also brings out another facet of Goethe the human. He loved those great universal laws, those big syntheses. He, unlike a lot of scientists who were becoming more and more specialized, as has happened in academia, where everyone specializes down to the point where they can't even interact with each other anymore. Goethe didn't like that. He wanted to have those broad stroke connections and didn't want to get mired down into one little speck. But because of that, what Ackermann is saying is that because of that, he would often fall at odds with the scientific community. Listen to this. This is something that Goethe told Ackermann, and I don't know whether just see how it hits you. He who does not expect 1 million readers should not write a line. I know what he's saying. He's saying if it's not worth, if what you're writing isn't worth the attention of 1 million readers, then you shouldn't write a line at all. In today's commercialized world, we could take that and going back to the New York Times #1 bestseller saying, hey, don't write anything unless it's going to appeal to 1 million readers and get you that fame, which is to say, commercial fiction. Nothing wrong with it. It's just not what he meant here. So we can't, we can't read this through our present, through presentism, right? But that's really some in one line. I think that's a really good advice. It stands up there with like Annie Dillard in The Writing Life saying, "Write as if you were dying." Write as if you were dying, and if you don't expect 1 million readers, if you don't expect it to be worth 1 million readers' time, don't write a line. What need of much definition, said Goethe. Lively feeling of situations and power to express them make the poet. We should only utter higher maxims so far as they can benefit the world. The rest we should keep within ourselves, and they will diffuse over our actions a luster like the mild radiance of a hidden sun. Goethe praised highly the poems of Victor Hugo. Of course, he didn't live long enough to read, say, Les Miserables. Would have loved to have heard what he had to say about that. But he praised highly the poems of Victor Hugo, and especially at that time, and to a degree in France today, the poems were what made Hugo. On closely observing him, I see, meaning Goethe saying on closely observing Victor Hugo, I see the source of this and other fresh talent of the same sort. They all come from Chateaubriand, who has really a distinguished rhetorico-poetical talent. It might be done in 3 months. I think he's talking about part 2 of Faust. It might be done in 3 months, said he, but when am I to get the time for it? The day has too many claims on me. It is difficult to isolate myself sufficiently. This morning, the hereditary Grand Duke was with me. Tomorrow at noon, the Grand Duchess proposes visiting me. I must prize such visits as a high favor. They embellish my life, but they occupy my mind. I am obliged to think what I have new to offer such dignified personages, and how I can worthily entertain them. And this is also something, and I think is pretty well known, that Goethe was pretty high up in the political and kind of local governmental ranks there in Weimar. He was like head of the Weimar theater, but he was also wrapped up in lots of different public works. And because of that, and because of his growing status as a thinker and a writer and a natural scientist, he had this kind of endless parade of distinguished visitors there at his very nice accommodations. And so he constantly was having to entertain them. So, and he's feeling it at this point in his life, and he's trying to balance everything out. And so he's interesting in that, he's such a deep thinker and so committed to a high level of art. But yet he knows that he needs to be involved in helping people. So it's really interesting, the sort of philanthropist poet. He says the classic Walpurgis Night, which takes place in part two, and is sort of the parallel of the the classical Walpurgis Night versus the pagan. Well, the classical was pagan as well. The more Germanic, folkloric Walpurgis Nacht of part one. We'll get into all that here in a bit. Must be written in rhyme, and yet the whole must have an antique character. It is not easy to find a suitable sort of verse. And then the dialogue with an exclamation mark. So this just gives you an idea of how much Goethe put into planning how the form, down to the meter, and whether it should rhyme, and so on, and how that would mirror the time in which it was taking place and the culture in which it was taking place, just to show some stuff that could get lost in our English translation, but that Goethe very much took into account. At one point, he says, I am more and more convinced that poetry is the universal possession of mankind. He said, if we really want a pattern, we must always return to the ancient Greeks, in whose works the beauty of mankind is constantly represented. And indeed, in part two, he goes back to the ancient Greeks to an excellent and entertaining degree. What would be the use of poets if they only repeated the record of the historian? The poet must go further and give us, if possible, something higher and better. That reminds me of something I read a long time ago. I can't remember 100% what the title was. I know it was by Leland Ryken. I know I've talked about it on this channel. But he talks about how fiction can capture the truth better than facts. That's exactly what I think Goethe is getting here. The Greeks were so great that they regarded fidelity to historic facts less than the treatment of them by the poet. One thinks of Herodotus. I have known and loved Molière, continued Goethe, from my youth, and have learned from him during my whole life. I never fail to read some of his plays every year, that I may keep up a constant intercourse with what is excellent. So, just to show I'm always interested in influences, what great writers read. The printed words are indeed only a faint reflex of the life that stirred within me during the invention. But the actor must bring us back to this first fire which animated the poet with respect to his subject. This is, of course, talking about the staging of these plays. So that's also a good point, just really quickly to digress, because I think the only, if I'm not mistaken, the only other play that is in my core is Hamlet. And there is very much something to be said about the difference between us sitting and reading it, which is a wonderful experience, and then watching a well-done production of it. I asked Goethe which of the new philosophers he thought the highest. Kant, he said, beyond a doubt. He is the one whose doctrines still continue to work and have penetrated most deeply into our German civilization. And he recommends to Eckermann the critique on the power of judgment, which is the third critique, and the one that I talked about and that Brian Counter used in my previous video, the four movements the four aesthetic moments. They come and ask what idea I meant to embody in my Faust, as if I knew myself and could inform them. From heaven, through the world, to hell would indeed be something, but this is no idea, only a course of action. And further, that the devil loses the wager, and that a man continually struggling from difficult errors towards something better should be redeemed, is an effective, and to many a good enlightening thought. But it is no idea at the foundation of the whole and of every individual scene. It would have been a fine thing indeed if I had strung so rich, varied, and highly diversified a life as I have brought to view in Faust upon the slender string of one pervading idea. I love that because I think where people go awry or amiss with talking about Faust, the whole Faust, is in trying to find that one singular thread or that one overarching idea, that one summary statement. The way that it is crafted and the depths which it plumbs defies summary statements, defies sort of summing it up with one unifying idea that we can glean, put in our pocket, and leave the work behind. I love that. This is Eckermann talking. Hegel, whom Goethe esteems very highly as a person, though he does not much relish some of the fruits produced by his philosophy, is here. In his honor, Goethe this evening gave a tea party at which was also presented Zelter, who intended to depart tonight. Anyway, I probably shouldn't have done that last part, but just to say that, Goethe was throwing tea parties for Hegel. This is wild stuff. What a life. What a life. What are we? About halfway. A little past halfway. Goethe spoke thus. Aristotle observed nature better than any modern, but he was too hasty with his opinions. We must go slowly and gently to work with nature if we would get anything out of her. Indeed, I may say that only in Rome have I felt what it really is to be a man. To this elevation, to this happiness of feeling, I have never since arisen. Indeed, compared with my situation at Rome, I have never since felt real gladness. And indeed, it seems Goethe went through some kind of spiritual transfiguration during his Italian travels. And so reading more about his experiences in Italy, along with some stuff I've been getting into with John Ruskin, and his Seven Lamps of Architecture, the Stones of Venice, and sort of his Italian writings are getting me prepped for a big Italy trip next year. And I have firmly put Goethe's some 400 some page book of his Italian journeys on my reading list. My dear young friend, said he, I will confide to you something that may help you on a great deal. My works cannot be popular. He who thinks and strives to make them so is in error. They are written not for the multitude, but only for individuals who desire something congenial, whose aims are like my own. So really, we should probably pair that with the advice earlier when he said, if you're not writing for a million readers, then don't write at all. Men will become more clever and more acute, but not better, happier, and stronger in action. Wow. the prophet Goethe. Faust sprang up at the same time as Werther. I brought it with me in 1775 to Weimar. I had written it on a letter paper and had not made an erasure, for I took care not to write down a line that was not worthy to remain. So more insight to the long gestation and careful incubation and birthing of Faust. I have found a paper of mine, among some others, said Goethe today, in which I call architecture petrified music. Really, I think there is something in this. The tone of mind produced by architecture approaches the effect of music. I really, really like that. And there is a footnote here that says that Schelling, in his Philosophie der Kunst, which is the philosophy of art, calls architecture frozen music. And it says it seems uncertain which of these, Goethe or Schelling, said it first. But indeed, the two were in communication. Schelling was part of the group there in Jena. I have had it in my mind for 50 years. He's talking about Faust. The invention of the second part is really as old as I say, but it may be an advantage that I have not written it down till now, when my knowledge of the world is so much clearer. So you've probably heard this about Faust, especially part two, because part one came out well before part two, and he spent a lot more time working on part two than part one. But the idea, and again, the Faust legend was already something that was known and had been treated in literature, but the idea of his approach to Faust is something that he worked with in his mind, and his mind was very much like a laboratory for 50 years. Although I had heard and felt the whole, yet so much remained an enigma to me that I asked Goethe for some explanation. But he, as usual, wrapped himself up in mystery as he looked on me with wide open eyes and repeated the words, "The mothers, mothers." Nay, it sounds so strange. "I can reveal to you no more," said he, "except that I found in Plutarch that in ancient Greece mention what? Except that I found in Plutarch that in ancient Greece mention was made of the mothers as divinities." So he's talking about the mothers scene in part two. But I love that. So much remained an enigma to me. That's Eckermann talking. That I asked Goethe for some explanation. But then he wrapped himself up in mystery. And there, was it Winston Churchill? Didn't someone say something about an enigma wrapped in a mystery? Or who they were referring to? I'll get my fact-checking department on that in post-production. "The mythological figures that crowd upon me," said he, "are innumerable, but I restrain myself and select those that produce the proper pictorial effect. Faust has now met Chiron, and I hope I shall be successful with the scene. If I work hard, I shall have done the Walpurgis Nacht in a couple of months. Nothing more shall take me off Faust, for it will be odd enough if I live to finish it. And yet it is possible. The fifth act is as good as done, and the fourth will almost write itself." So it's amazing that we have this insight into the process of writing the second part. This is Eckermann speaking. And he's talking about Auerbach's Cellar, the Witch's Kitchen, the Blocksberg, the Imperial Diet, the Masquerade, the Paper Money, the Laboratory, the Classical Walpurgis Night, the Helena, are all of them little independent worlds, which, each being complete in itself, do indeed work upon each other. yet come but little in contact. The great point with the poet is to express a manifold world, and he uses the story of a celebrated hero merely as a sort of thread on which he may string what he pleases. This is the case with Gil Blas and the Odyssey. You are perfectly right, said Goethe, and the only matter of importance is, while the whole always remains incommensurable, and even on that account like an unsolved problem, constantly lures mankind to study it again and again. This is a great, if you want some kind of summary, this is it. The summary being that it defies summary, and you have to keep coming back. If anybody asks me for good advice, I say I am ready to give it, but only on condition that he will promise me not to take it. And it just gives you some insight into the cheekiness and playfulness of Goethe's character, but also that sounds so much like something Michael Silverblatt would say to me. I'll give you this advice if you promise not to take it. He sent for the stitched Faust, meaning he wanted to put all of it together and kind of see it as a physical object, what he had written of part 2 so far. And I was surprised to see how much he had written, for a good folio volume was before me. And all, I said, has been done in the 6 years that I have been here. And yet, amid so many other occupations, you could have devoted but little time to it. We now see how much a work grows, even if we add something only now and then. And Goethe says, that is a conviction that strengthens with age, while youth believes all must be done in a single day. So again, patience. Let it gestate. He's talking about the kind of feverish, energetic vigor of youth that, oh, we've got this idea for a book and we're just ready to see our names in print and we just want to rush through it. Versus, spending decades piecing it out little by little. The first part is almost entirely subjective. This is Goethe. It proceeded entirely from a perplexed, impassioned individual, and his semi-darkness is probably highly pleasing to mankind. But in the second part, there is scarcely anything of the subjective. Here is seen a higher, broader, clearer, more passionless world, and he who has not looked about him and had some experience will not know what to make of it. So he's basically saying, my readership needs to be a little older and have experienced a lot to approach part 2, whereas he's saying part 1 is much more readily accessible. The old Walpurgisnacht, said Goethe, is monarchical, since the devil is there respected throughout as a decided chief, but the classic Walpurgisnacht is thoroughly republican, since all stand on a plane near one another, so that each is as prominent as his associates and nobody is subordinate or troubled about the rest. That just sort of opened my mind to a whole other dimension of what's going on in Faust that totally flew over my head. He talks about some lines in Faust, and he says, in these lines is contained the key to Faust's salvation. In Faust himself, there is an activity that becomes constantly higher and purer to the end. And from above, there is eternal love coming to his aid. This harmonizes perfectly with our religious views, according to which we can obtain heavenly bliss not through our own strength alone, but with the assistance of divine grace. And there's really an affinity here with the Commedia of Dante and Beatrice leading Dante up into paradise. So Goethe finished Faust Part 2, and thus the entire Faust. And he says, my remaining days I may now consider a free gift. And it is now, in fact, of little consequence what I now do or whether I do anything. So it's almost like, and let's see, that's in 31. That's in 1831, and he will die in 32, not too much later. So it's almost like having the whole of Faust within him almost was something that kept him alive. And once he finally got it all out there and got it down the way he wanted to be presented to others, and in fact, he did not want it published in his lifetime. He wanted it held off until after his death for publication. It was almost like he needed to complete that before he could pass on. Pretty remarkable story. I mean, I'm a sucker for stories around this story, and this one is great. All right, we've just spent a lot of time talking about Goethe and focusing on the conversations by Eckermann, but I really wanted to spend that time because, again, this book just sort of stole the show for me, and I loved it. So in a way, this is as much a review or discussion of that book as Faust. Now, before I get into going through Faust, let me just read you some excerpts from some various translations that I have here so you can get a sense of this new one put out by Deep Vellum. And so it seems right to me that we'll read just the first bit of scene 3 in which we first meet Faust, sitting at his desk in a high-arched Gothic chamber. So this is the Faust who has been striving and striving and striving. He wants to achieve this sort of like sublime, divine omniscience, and just can't. And he's turned to everything. And now, he's even resorting to magic. And we know that he's about to go into this despair that will almost lead him to suicide. But I'll save the latest translation and read some others. So let's look at David Luke first, and I'll read just a bit of Night. And this is Faust, sitting restlessly at his desk. Well, that's philosophy I've read, and law and medicine, and I fear theology too, from A to Z. Hard studies all that have cost me dear. And so I sit, poor silly man, no wiser now than when I began. They call me professor and doctor forsooth, for misleading many an innocent youth, these last 10 years now, I suppose, pulling them to and fro by the nose. And I see all our search for knowledge is vain, and this burns my heart with bitter pain. I've more sense, to be sure, than the learned fools, the masters and pastors and scribes from the schools. No scruples to plague me, no irksome doubt, no hellfire or devil to worry about. Yet I take no pleasure in anything now, for I know nothing. I wonder how I can still keep up the pretense of teaching, or bettering mankind with my empty preaching. Can I even boast any worldly success? What fame or riches do I possess? No dog would put up with such an existence. And so I am seeking magic's assistance, calling on spirits and their might to show me many a secret sight, to relieve me of the wretched task of telling things I ought rather to ask, to grant me a vision of nature's forces that blind the world, all its seeds and sources, and innermost life. All this I shall see, and stop peddling in words that mean nothing to me. O sad full moon, my friend, why must you see me suffer? Look your last. Here at this desk so many a night I've watched and waited for your light, to visit me again and shine over this paper world of mine. Oh, take me to the hilltops there to wander in the sweet moonlit air, by mountain caves through fields to roam, hovering with spirits in your gloam, cleansed of book learning's fog and stew, and healed by bathing in your dew. So that again is the translation in verse by David Luke. Now let's look at a translation, and let me see who this translation is by. This is in the Everyman's Library. Faust. Pantheon. Translation. Translations are all selected better. Hard for me to find there. Maybe it says at the beginning here. This is curiously in a prose style. Who did this translation? Oh, here we go. Translated by Barker Fairley. And this again is done in prose style, so it's not versified. Faust, sitting at his desk, restless. Look at me. I've worked right through philosophy, right through medicine and jurisprudence, as they call it, and that wretched theology too. Toiled and slaved at it, and know no more than when I began. I have my master's degree and my doctor's, and it must be 10 years now that I've led my students by the nose this way and that, upstairs and downstairs, and all the time I see plainly that we don't and can't know anything. It eats me up. Of course, I'm ahead of these silly scholars, these doctors and clerics and whatnot. I have no doubts or scruples to bother me, and I snap my fingers at hell and the devil. But I pay the price. I've lost all joy in life. I don't delude myself. I shall never know anything worth knowing, never have a word to say that might be useful to my fellow men. I own nothing, no money, no property. I have no standing in the world. It's a dog's life, and worse. And this is why I've gone over to magic, to see if I can get secrets out of the spirit world and not have to go on sweating and saying things I don't know. Discover, it may be, what it is that holds the world together. Behold with my own eyes its innermost workings, and stop all this fooling with words. Oh, if this were the last time the full moon found me here in my agony. How often have I sat at this desk among my books, watching for you in the deep of night, till at last, my melancholy friend, you came. Oh, to be out on the hilltops in your lovely light, floating among spirits at some cavern's mouth, or merging into your meadows in the dimness. Oh, to be clear once and for all of this pedantry, this stench, and to wash myself in your dew and be well again. All right, now let's look at a translation by Walter Arndt. And this was actually the very first Faust I read in this Norton Critical Edition, Walter Arndt. And I really like this. And the Norton Critical Editions are just wonderful in general, especially for approaching something like Faust for the first time. All right. Here we go. And this is in verse. And I should have pointed out that David Luke retains the rhymed couplets. Faust is restless in his armchair by his desk. I have pursued, alas, philosophy, jurisprudence, and medicine, and, God help me, theology, with fervent zeal through thick and thin, and here, poor fool, I stand once more, no wiser than I was before. They call me magister, doctor, no less, and for some 10 years, I would guess, through ups and downs and twos and fro's, I have led my pupils by the nose. This one's also in rhymed couplets. I see there is nothing we can know. It fair sears my heart to find it so. True, I know more than those impostors, those parsons and scribes, doctors and masters. No doubt can plague me or conscience cavil. I stand not in fear of hell or devil. But then all delight for me is shattered. I do not pretend to worthwhile knowledge. Don't flatter myself I can teach in college how men might be converted or bettered. Nor have I estate or moneyed worth, nor honor or splendor of this earth. No dog would live out such wretched part, so I resorted to magic's art, to see if by spirit, mouth, and might many a secret might come to light. So I need toil no longer so, propounding what I do not know. So I perceived the inmost force that bonds the very universe. View all enactments seed and spring, and quit my verbiage mongering. Verbiage mongering, I love that. Oh, full moon radiant, would that you, who many a midnight vigil through, have found me wakeful in this chair, might look your last on my despair. As over books I used to bend, you would appear to me, sad friend. Oh, would that on high mountain ways I wandered by your lovely rays, might haunt with sprites a cavern rift on meadows in your twilight drift, and rid of learning's fetid fume, bathe whole my spirit in your spume. All right, so now let's hear this new translation. Faust, restless, sitting at his desk in a high-arched Gothic chamber. And this is also in verse and rhymed couplets. I've studied, philosophy, medicine, law, and more's the pity, the wasteland of theology, consuming endless energy, and stand here, foolish sophomore, no wiser than I was before. They call me master, even doctor now, and round, I know not how, for 10 long, useless years I chose to lead my students by the nose. That's why my hot heart burns me so, because I know we cannot know. Yes, I'm a smarter fool than those professors, scribes, and holy Joes. No doubts or scruples plague my cell. I fear no devil nor his hell. But that's just why my joy is fled, all my pretense of wisdom dead, all pose of teacher but a sham. No guide or counselor I am. Nor have I either goods or gold, my name's not honored or extolled. No dog would want to live like me. And so I've turned to sorcery, testing the spirit's potency, to show the mysteries to me. So I'll no longer sweat with shame to name what I've no name to name, that I may know what secret force unites the cosmos in its course, and look into the seeds of life, and cease to cram into mere words the universe. Oh, you full moon, once more again, I pray, take pity on my pain, that many a midnight with its ache has kept me at this desk awake. Above these books and paper pedantry, my gloomy friend, appear to me. Ah, might I on the mountainside walk in your lovely light and glide with spirits over the crevasse, or twilight meadow floating pass, I guess I should have said crevasse, unburdened of all-knowing pain. Not all-knowing pain, but all-knowing hyphen pain. I like that. Bathe in your dew, be whole again. So there you go. I found this very readable and often rather cheeky, and capturing the cheeky, humorous element of Faust. So you can weigh those as you wish, and see which translation speaks to you the best. And with that, let's get into the first part of Faust. Like I said, you can't really read just the first part of Faust because nothing is settled. And in fact, like I said earlier, when I finished it, I thought, man, that's great. That's a very enjoyable translation. Great to reacquaint myself with Goethe's treatment of Faust, but everything's, there's no closure. The double wager, neither of them is settled here. So you pretty much, you pretty much have to read part two if you want it to be, the whole work. Certainly you can dip your toe in here. And I'll just go ahead and say that with part two in the David Luke translation, I actually really did enjoy part two a lot more than part one. Part one is really just the setup. It's the first episode of a season, we could say. But this is from the introduction, 15 Layers of Faust, which is really well done by one of the translators, Frederick Turner. I'll just read a couple of things from it. He points out that Halloween, as it is celebrated around the globe, owes as much to Goethe as Christmas does to Dickens. That really caught my attention, and as I dug into it, he is referring to the depiction of the Walpurgis Nacht in Faust. But what a wonderful statement, and very literary. To search for immortality is perhaps the most fundamental story of all, and Goethe's retelling of it is both remarkably inclusive of its many nuances and profoundly original. And almost at the same moment that Faust drinks the potion, he sees in the magic mirror the vision of the girl Gretchen whom he will destroy. And it turns out that the cost of immortality is the destruction of the world's order, and the restoration of youth is achieved by sucking the life out of an innocent victim. And then he concludes that Faust is thus a vampire story. Really entertaining and intelligent and insightful introduction here. Goethe thus sets his play quite unambiguously in the period from 1519 to 1546, between the 95 Theses that started the Protestant Reformation and Luther's death. Very, very interesting. It is a significant moment, the waning of the Renaissance in Southern Europe, the springtime of it in Northern Europe, and the start of the great split within Western Christendom. I always like it when scholars can put things in those great historical contexts for me. They just don't come readily to me. Milton claims to justify the ways of God to man, and Mephistopheles sets out to demolish that claim. Might use that at the very beginning of this video. So thank you, Frederick Turner. All right, so we're opening up. So let me give a broad stroke of the plot here. Listen, first of all, like all the works in this Western core, all the great works, while you're reading it, you're going to notice all these little details, all right? And you're going to continue to notice details, and you're going to continue to get new insights to old details. And while you're experiencing it and while you're reading it, especially with the way our short-term memory works, the pieces will coalesce and come together and inform each other. But in hindsight, we're often very fettered and stunted. So there's no way I can sit and give you a really good, nobody can sit unless they had lots of notes at their disposal or lots of time and you were very patient with them. You can't sit and really kind of give a good synopsis. All right, you can go and read the Wikipedia article that attempts to give kind of the plot summary of both parts. And even that, if you were to print it out, it's going to be something like 10 pages, right? Rest assured that while you're reading it, it'll all come together, right? But I'm just going to give broad strokes so we have some context here. I think most people, when they think about Faust, without having read it, think that it's just, they approach it more like a genie, right? Like Aladdin and the genie, where Goethe makes a pact with the devil where he sells his soul so that he can get anything he wants in this life, right? It's not quite how it works. And a lot of people just chalk it up as that. It's the story of a guy who sells his soul to the devil to become the greatest intellectual ever. That's not at all how it works. In fact, what happens is that sort of like what happens in Job, which is very explicitly what and deliberately what Goethe bases it on. But at the beginning of Job, Satan comes to God and basically says, he makes this challenge against Job that he can get him to turn on God. And God's like, you don't know my servant Job the way I do, but you know what? I give you free reign. Have at it. Just spare his life. Meaning you can do everything except kill him. So it's a little bit of the inverse here, right? Whereas in the biblical book of Job, Satan is going to rain down just horrors on Job and his family to get him to turn from God. Here, Mephistopheles is given free reign to give, I almost said Job, Faust, everything he wants in the natural world, in this earthly realm, right? So it's like, again, like the genie, like we're granted these great wishes, right? And so that's the wager that's made. And God's like, look, I'm telling you, you're going to find that you're going to lose this wager because I know Faust is ultimately righteous, even though he's in a bad place right now. But go for it. Go tempt him. Well, that's the first wager. The second wager that happens is between Mephistopheles and Faust. And Faust, sure enough, he's at his wit's end. He's studied everything. He's the greatest scholar, all-knowing, and he's turning to magic. Even magic fails him. He wants divine supreme knowledge, right? And he almost poisons himself just to get it over with, just to kill himself. In a wonderful and explicit allusion to Hamlet. But then the Easter bells from the church kind of snap him out of it. They send him back nostalgically, as in Proust, to happier childhood times, and he decides not to go through with the suicide. Well, then later, and very humorously, a poodle follows him and his famulus Wagner back to his chambers and then turns into Mephistopheles. Well, they end up making a wager together. And their wager is interesting because it isn't, I'll give you, it isn't Mephistopheles saying, I'll give you the world for your soul. And that's it. Faust asserts his own terms. He says, okay, I'll go through with this, but my terms are, you have to bring to me a knowledge or an experience or something in this life that is so sublime, so striking, so alluring, so blissful that I want to live in it forever, if that makes sense. Yeah, so yeah, I think that's the way I want to say that. And what I think is happening here is Faust, whether conscientiously or not, has this insight into human nature such that he knows that's impossible, right? He has learned that this is an impossibility in this life. And so it's almost like he's hedging his bet, right? It's rigged. And so this is why you'll hear mixed opinions on the double wager and who won, who lost. And in a way, both Faust and Mephistopheles both won and lost. But ultimately God wins. And we'll get to that towards the end. But it's amazing how he asserts his own terms in there and says, okay, but I'll only do this if you give me this experience or bring me face to face with something that is just so unbelievably sublime that I never want to be without it, right? I never want to let it go. The ultimate experience. And Mephistopheles agrees. And so then the whole thing, especially in part one, becomes about, Mephistopheles guiding him through all these different earthly, fleshly temptations. It culminates in the tragedy around the wonderful Gretchen, who is like a Beatrice figure. There's matricide, there's infanticide. I mean, it's just brutal. All right. But ultimately, she's saved, and she's redeemed by grace. And Faust realizes that this pact and this quest of his to find the ultimate sublime earthly pleasure is kind of leaving a trail of blood everywhere. And then it ends. Okay? It just ends. So you have to read the second part, because now in the second part, now it transcends time and space. All right? Like, and sometimes are superimposed. Like, for example, Helen of Troy is brought into like medieval Germany. I don't think that's quite right, but I mean, and she doesn't realize it. And there are these illusions, and Faust is transported to ancient Greece, and just like he's involved in a present day Germanic Walpurgisnacht on the Brocken. He engages in a bacchanal. It goes all over the place, but it's again all about the second wager, and ultimately what ends up happening is Faust gets to a place where he does. I'm being a little cryptic on purpose here, where he does find something that he wants to do that he sees as greater than his own life. And in that moment, he drops dead because he has both one. I keep having this right in my mind, and then when I try to express it, it gets a little slippery. But ultimately, God wins the initial wager, because the sublime, the thing that Faust now does not want to live without seeing happen, is a righteous pursuit that is turned outwards towards others and not himself. And so God wins overall. And then the wager with Mephistopheles is technically won by Mephistopheles. That's what I was trying to say. So Faust loses his own bargain. But unbeknownst to him, perhaps guided by grace, because of the way he hedged it and because of what it was hinged on with the weakness of human nature, he lost the bet with Mephistopheles, but God won his bet with Mephistopheles. So it's complex, and there's a lot that can be read into it. So that's my belabored, somewhat, somewhat coherent plot précis. Not really. All right, so let's get into it here. Let's get into it. What are some things that I said about part one? I think, it's cool how the whole drama kind of starts off with that prologue in the theater that kind of pits popular pop art versus serious art. That only, this can go so many different ways, and but in the end, it's a life of pleasure or a life of sacrifice. And I really pushed myself, even though Goethe told Eckermann not to do it. I really pushed myself to sort of sum up, and I came up with two different questions, sort of summing up the whole of the moral imperative of Faust. And it goes back to that eternal question of what is worth doing with our time. But I think beyond that, or wrapped up in that, or I think they're intertwined, but Do we want a life of pleasure or a life of sacrifice? But furthermore, are they mutually exclusive? And I have this nagging, not suspicion, but I have this nagging assertion or proposition that Goethe, in the whole of Faust, is saying that a life of pleasure and a life of sacrifice are not mutually exclusive. If you're making the right sacrifices, you will experience the right pleasures. And it is, of course, an eternal element. But that's as far as I can go with it. Let's get on. Let's just read through my notes here, and I'll make commentary throughout. So yeah, that the dedication at the very end of the last two lines of the dedication before the prologue in the theater say, "And I possess and am seems lost and sorry, all I possess and am seems lost and banished, and what's reality to me is what once vanished." And so I feel like we hear right there at the very beginning an echo of Dante's Pilgrim's Cry, that midway through this mortal life, I awakened in a dark wood. The director says, "For me, I'm eager to delight the many. Their eyebrows raised, their daily cares all banished. They sit there and they hope to be astonished." He wants to proffer catharsis for profit. "They've read an awful lot and may be sated. How do we keep it fresh and make it new? Teach by delighting, please by being true." And it's interesting because, at this point in history, people know a whole lot more than they used to. The audiences of ancient Greece and ancient Rome versus the people putting on the plays to now, set in 16th century Germany, people are much, much more learned. And like Frederick Turner brought up, this is placed right there with the 95 Theses and the schism between the Catholic Church and Protestantism. A lot of that hinged on Martin Luther wanting to educate the masses, wanting to educate the laity, taking scripture out of the authoritative lock and key of the clergy and placing it in the hands of the laity. And then, of course, that make it new, you might have heard, sort of echoes T.S. Eliot's Modernist Manifesto, which, of course, that would be to commit an anachronism because Goethe would not have known about that. Then the poet. The poet wants the sublime. Don't talk to me about that motley many, capital M, meaning the masses, mass appeal, from whom the fertile spirit must take flight. No, lead me to some quiet heaven cranny. I like some of these little words that they've come up with, where only for the poet blooms delight. What's born to glitter is a moment's wages. The real, capital R, remains undying for the ages. So again, you feel that tension between what is the fleeting pleasures, the ephemeral, versus the eternal. And then the funny man, as it's called here. This is all about entertainment. He wants to cater to the masses, the better to arouse their passions. Oh, then, be bold, give us a masterpiece. Let fancy reign with all its noble chorus, insight and reason, passion and release. But still be sure to add some folly for us. They're talking to the poet who ultimately has to write this thing. The director again. You'll sway the many only through the many, each of them looking for what feels their own. He who brings much to all brings some to any, and each one goes home satisfied. And each one goes home satisfied alone. A smorgasbord is what most pleases. So what ends up happening is, and I feel like Goethe is sort of winking at us here and saying, hey, I'm gonna give you everything, right? This play is gonna contain it all. It's gonna give you what the director wants, what the funny man wants, and what the poet wants. The poet again, sort of here also reasserting the esteem of the office of the poet as not just being an entertainer. When nature twists on her indifferent spindle the endless thread of her unresting time, when all things in a vexed, discordant bundle buzz with no reason and no rhyme, who orders the chaotic flow of motion, giving it life and measure, rhythm and bound? Who calls each particle to mutual dedication and splendor in splendid concord so it may resound? Who lets the raging storm become a passion, kindles to meaning evening's crimson glow? Who scatters the spring flowers in wild profusion where the beloved's footsteps go? Who braids the green leaves formally unmeaning to wreaths of honor for a deed or quest? Who guards Olympus, all the gods convening? The poet, man's best strength made manifest. And indeed, as you can hear in this translation, very poetically captured, sort of reaffirming what's being said through the saying of it. And then the poet goes on to say in this one line, "Give back my youth, its storm and stress." And indeed, this references the Sturm und Drang, which is storm and stress, and was a movement that of which Goethe was a part, and Werther is an avatar. Then the director, "Let the whole circle of creation strut the scant boards of our drama hut," and that will happen, "and move as fast as words can tell from heaven through the earth to hell." So this is exactly like Lucifer's fall, which cues us to the prologue in heaven. So then we jump straight into that sort of reimagining of the prologue in heaven of Job, chapter 2. Mephistopheles in here, the banter between the archangels Raphael, Gabriel, and Michael, and then the Lord and Mephistopheles, the repartee here is captured so wonderfully. And I won't do it justice unless I were to read the whole thing, but a couple of things. Mephistopheles comes in and says, "I see only mankind sick and self-tormenting. Life might be better for him even had you not given him in gleams a hint of heaven." And one feels Lucifer speaking from his own gleams, his own time in heaven, as well as the glints. And it brings up something so profound, too. It's like if we had no inkling of a better life, we wouldn't be so discontent in this life. And here are some more strong words coming from Satan. "No, Lord, to me it's always pretty nasty there," meaning in his dominion here on earth. "The people bear such griefs, not even I take pleasure to plague such wretches with a further measure." So basically, Satan saying, look, they're so nasty to each other that sometimes it's repugnant even to me. And then the Lord says, Mephistopheles first, "Just let me be his gentle guide. He'll take my path at my dictating." The Lord says, "So long as he on earth abide, nothing to you shall be forbidden." Same thing that he says in Job. The Lord says, "Or stand ashamed then when you must confess. A good man in his darkest urge of passion knows what the right way is nevertheless." And so the Lord knows that even though Faust right now, as we're about to see, is in his darkest moment, he's at rock bottom, he still in his heart desires the righteous path. And so that is how the Lord is hedging his bet And then we go to night. And I read the first part of that in our translation. But Faust to Wagner. Wagner is his famulus, and that is an assistant who works for a scholar or typically for a magician. Faust says, if you can't feel it, you will never chase it. If it can't burst forth from your soul and take the hearts of all who face it with easy, powerful control. That's what he wants. And he's so jaded that nothing is, he can't feel anything. There's nothing that's bursting from the soul and taking his heart. And then we note that Wagner echoes the famous aphorism from Hippocrates, "Oh God, yes, art is long and life is short." And one thing that Faust is, if nothing else, is a veritable encyclopedia of cultural references from the millennia. And then in that explicit Hamlet allusion and foreshadowing of the attempt at suicide comes here. Faust is looking at a skull. What are you grinning at, you empty skull, as if your wit, like my brain, has gone straying? Having long searched in daylight plain and twilight's pall, lusting for truth, but ever truth mislaying. And we'll get to some neat stuff in the criticism towards the end of this video on that moment with the skull. And I'll also note that one of Goethe's great poems is about him regarding Schiller's skull, the skull of his good friend. Here we go. So yeah, this is Faust and Wagner still conversing. Faust first. Yet in each soul is born a yearning that we might fly so, on and high and long. When in blue spaces lost and unreturning, the lark pipes forth its piercing song. When over rugged pine-clad ridges, the stretched-out eagle soaring rides, and skimming finny lakes and sedges, the homebound heron strokes and glides. So there's a lot of great lyric poetry in here, and in the opening of part two as well. But Wagner represents the sort of almost disinterested, passionateless, sort of cold, hardcore intellectual. He's cloying to people he sees as a greater intellect than he, like Faust. But he hasn't yet been disillusioned like Faust has. So he immediately rejoins with this. I've had such whims at times when I was idle, but not felt such a passion pull my bridle. One gets fed up with forest, field, and brook. I'd never envy any bird its pinion. Such different joy born through the mind's dominion from page to page, from book to book. On those sweet winter nights, the life of soul warms every limb and comforts all the body. As, some costly parchment slowly you unroll, and all of heaven descends upon your study. So Wagner, for us bookworms, really strikes a chord too, because, for him, the highest achievement or the greatest pleasure is to just curl up in your study and unroll some new parchment and let the world of knowledge fill your soul. Okay, now Faust. Interestingly, he sits down to start translating the Bible. And he's translating the very first sentence of John, where it says, "In the beginning was the Word." And he goes, "At once I'm struck. Who'd help me if I erred? And I'll just say that this is a notoriously untranslatable prologue of John's gospel. And there's a great essay on its untranslatability by David Bentley Hart in the second edition of his translation of the New Testament. We'll skip way off. And, after different things have happened, like he's gone to, one of the famous episodes, the very first thing Mephistopheles does is take him to a tavern where all these revelers are drinking, and he turns their drink into this amazing wine, but then shows that it's just blood. And, he tries to get at Faust in these different ways, like drinking and so on. And he sees that Faust just isn't interested. And then eventually Mephistopheles says, Faust looks in a mirror, and he's granted like his youthful figure, his youthful looks, and he glimpses this female form. What he has seen is Gretchen, again, the sort of innocent virgin, right, who's beautiful. And Faust says, one more glance in the mirror at that presence, so beautiful in female form. And Mephistopheles says, no, no, you'll soon have woman's very essence before you, in the flesh and warm. And then aside, sort of to the audience, with this drink working in your belly, Helen you'll see in any Nelly. Now, a couple of things. He's saying, look, this potion I gave you, you're not, see, every girl is going to look like a 10, right? But he cites Helen, which is telling because he's of course alluding to Helen of Troy, who will make an appearance as Helen of Troy herself in part 2. But it's also brings out the fact that in Christopher Marlowe's treatment of Faust, Helen is utilized, of course, as the highest form of beauty, the highest emblem of beauty, perfect beauty, right? And it is actually Christopher Marlowe who coined the phrase, the face that launched 1,000 ships, in his Dr. Faustus. So anyway, that's in here. Let's see. Then we skip ahead. At this point, there's a lot of plot details that I'm skipping over here, but basically, with the help of Mephistopheles, Faust has seduced Gretchen. He's seduced the good girl, right? And even when they're going to consummate this seduction, Gretchen's worried that her mother will hear. So Faust gives her this potion to give the mother that's going to help her sleep, right? But it's really, it's actually a poison. So he ends up causing Gretchen to commit matricide. Then he gets in a fight with Gretchen's brother, Valentine, and he and Mephistopheles kill him. So there's fratricide, I guess, although she didn't kill him, so it's not really fratricide. It's just homicide. And then in her absolute madness and grief, they find that, they figure out that their union has caused her to get pregnant. And you can probably guess what happens. I said it earlier, but there's an infanticide. Despite all of this, she is ultimately saved. And later in part 2, we'll see another offspring of Faust's with Helen. I'm telling you, it gets wild in part 2. But anyway, Mephistopheles here. And these are wonderful, wonderful, powerful words. So let me give you what Faust says first. He says, "Can't you perceive the new vitality this wandering in the wilds creates in me? Yes, if you shared that strange sensation, you might be devil enough to thwart my exaltation." Mephistopheles says, "You mean the ecstasy eternal, to lie at night in dewy mountains vernal, embracing earth and sky with thrills of pleasure, letting yourself swell up to godlike measure, piercing earth's gates with your prophetic power, all 6 days worth in one heart's surging hour. In joys I know not what, in such elation, soon he will overflow with love on all creation. And so this son of earth is lost, and his high intuition lightly tossed." And then with a gesture, "I may not say its termination." So isn't that incredible? Great poetry, powerful words. But that moment when he says, all 6 days work in one heart's surging hour. And obviously he's referring to the 6 days of God's creation. So there's a very sacrilegious swipe there too. But that line might almost top Melville's Vesuvius for an inkstand and a condor's feather for a quill. Faust. Call it as you wish by any name whatever. Joy call it, heart, love, God. I have no name to call it. Feeling is all, a name's but sound and smoke, clouding the heavens' light. So again, getting at that, the restriction that language puts on the sort of eternal ineffable, going back to in arche and ho logos, the Greek for in the beginning was the word. I'm skipping over some more. So the famous ending, Margareta or Gretchen. It's retained Margareta. There's an editorial note or translator's note somewhere in here that talks about how Goethe sort of goes back and forth interchangeably, so they follow the same thing. But Gretchen, after all of this bloodshed and just shame and sin and regret and so on, she cries out, "Save me, Father, I am your own. You angels, all you holy nation camp around me, for here my salvation. Heinrich," meaning Faust, "I shudder at you so." And Mephistopheles says, "And so she's judged," meaning that's it, she's damned to hell. But then a voice from above goes, "Is saved," sort of not judged, but rather is saved. And then the last thing we get is Mephistopheles kind of telling Faust to come to him and saying, "Let's go." And then it says, a voice from within fading away, "Heinrich, Heinrich." So it's this dramatic ending, but totally inconclusive, right? And we knew that from the beginning because it was published as, I can't remember the exact title, but it was published as explicitly part one of a two-part tragedy. But where we end it here is all this bloodshed. Faust hasn't found the eternal sublime. Gretchen is dead. She's been taken up to heaven, yet she's curiously calling after Faust, and Mephistopheles kind of swipes Faust up and they go somewhere else. And so that is part one. Now we'll move into part two. Part two is gnarly. Like the sense I get is that, like Milton, Goethe sort of wants to rewrite the whole of Western civilization in his own image. And in the overall work, Goethe shows Faust's development from a scholar magician to poet artist. And it's like only the creative act will save him. And it's the only thing he now comes to believe in. He has to go beyond mere knowledge. And so what we get, and I choose these words specifically, but what we get here is a phantasmagoria of the entelechy. And we'll get into more of that later. But yeah, we've got the life of the intellectual, the striving to know all things, creating of life, / being God. So to achieve the knowledge of God, we almost have to create a thing that can create knowledge. We have to be able to step outside the container and perform the very acts that God himself creates. And so I think in that score, we're introduced to a character that is the homunculus. Wagner has created a homunculus in part 2, and we'll get to that. So, all this striving in the face of the lament of the teacher, the Qoheleth, in Ecclesiastes, that there's nothing new under the sun. And so the only thing that could be new is to create knowledge or to create man. Sorry about that. Youth versus old age is big here. The impossibility, one thing that's in here that really struck me a lot this time around was the impossibility of bringing the past into the present. And I had this fresh on my mind too, again, from Brian Counter's book, and curated moments of aesthetic experience, where you're basically trying to recreate the past and the present. Proust dipping the Madeleine in the lime blossom tea. But how it's so impossible. And a lot of this is articulated and presented to great effect by bringing Helen of Troy into the present, or attempting to, taking her out of her historical moment. Another thing that I think is really neat that Goethe does here is when he does transplant Mephistopheles to pagan classical Greece, we find that Mephistopheles has no dominion over everyone there because they're pagan. And that's a really neat creative device here. Faust subsumes, especially in part 2 again, subsumes all of history from ancient Egypt to present day Germany, ancient, classical, medieval, Renaissance, modernism. There it brings in a lot of Goethe's scientific preoccupations. We get a lot about Neptunism versus volcanism, how rocks, these competing geological theories of the day. Elements of this art. So strong, just like the elements of everything that goes into part 2 are the story, of course, myth, allusion, intertextuality, all that kind of stuff. But language, form, takes on so many different forms. Drama, epic, allegory, lyric, quest, the ballad, all are used and employed based on what's needed. The meter, like I said earlier, all the elements are integrated and modulated according to Goethe's devices at different times. But to give a sense of what we're facing when we come to part 2, imagine Satan traveling through realms with an unconscious Faust thrown over his shoulder and a sentient homunculus in a jar in his hand. And that sort of gives you an idea of part 2. All right, let's look at some notes from David Luke, the translator, in his sumptuous introduction. The complete Part 2, the long-awaited sequel, was unveiled in December 1832, having been deliberately withheld by Goethe until after his death. So that's where I got that tidbit. From the 16th until the later 18th century, the unquestioned assumption of the story was that Faustus was to be damned. It is not clear at what stage Goethe decided otherwise, because in Goethe's estimation, Faust is saved, and that's because of God winning that wager. The Arabian Nights tales, which he read intensively in a new translation just before resuming work on Faust in 1825. So yeah, in between finishing the Faust 1 and working on Faust 2, Goethe apparently got really into the Arabian Nights tales. And this introduction does a great job sort of teasing out a lot of the different threads that he used as embroidery for the story and the transitions and so on of Part 2, taken from the Arabian Nights. And of course, it should be mentioned that Goethe got very interested in Eastern poetry and philosophy and mysticism, Eastern culture in general. He produced his own poetry, the East-West Divan. And so you're getting a lot of this sort of like global synthesis in Part 2, which is what sets it apart now in this Western Core series, because this is the first time that it's starting to have more of a universal and global eye. And you know, not that his predecessors chose to just focus on this much. A lot of it has to do with just advances in communications and translations and things like that too. But at the beginning of Act 1, or to introduce it, Goethe needed an intelligible transition, a way of breaking the connection with Part 1 and continuing the Faust story in a quite different style and milieu. The tragic ending of the Gretchen drama must be decisively left behind, and Faust launched on a new career. A hero haunted by remorse would not suit Goethe's purposes, but one who could simply put the matter callously out of his mind would not do either. The solution, as Goethe explained to Eckermann in 1827, was to plunge Faust into a trance-like or death-like sleep in which he would forget his recent experiences completely. We should remember that Act 3, the Helena Act, was not only the first part of Part 2 to be published, but also, apart from possible fragments of Act 5, the first to be written. So these parts were written out of order and then integrated. But as we know, Goethe was simply doing this because he was led a lot by feel and intuition. And Helen is the centerpiece here. Helen is to be the Medusa-like sublime eternal of beauty that is to so captivate Faust that he loses his term of the wager. The difficult opus of making such a creature, the homunculus, was closely associated with the search for the philosopher's stone, which would turn base metals into gold. The homunculus was indeed often symbolically identified with the stone. On the allegorical level, it is a celebratory homage, the final homage of Goethe's life, to that culture of Greek antiquity which for so long and so profoundly influenced the culture of modern Europe, not least the literary classicism of Weimar, which was Goethe's own personal version of the Renaissance. A celebration, yet also an elegiac recognition that there cannot be a lasting synthesis of ancient and modern. A meeting and mingling of two cultural traditions is allegorized as a magic love story. Very well said. Scene 2 opens unambiguously in the manner of an Aeschylus, or Euripidean tragedy. The heroine and her chorus of captive Trojan women outside the palace, her expository monologue in iambic trimeters, the chorus answering with lyric odes in triadic form, a foreboding of doom, a monstrous prophetic figure confronting the heroine and the chorus, single-line altercations, passages of agitated trochaic tetrameter. The ancient rhymeless trimeter has been retained until the moment of Faust's ceremonious entry, but here, hardly perceptibly at first, it begins to disappear. Faust speaks in the iambic pentameters of Shakespeare's blank verse, which had become the classic line of Goethean and Schillerian drama, and Helen instinctively answers in the same meter. So I wanted to point that out just to show at what level of scrupulousness David Luke is translating this and maintaining metrical form where it was a deliberate selection by Goethe to imply something more about what's going on in Faust and to retain that in the English translation. Shortly before he finished writing, in his 82nd and last birthday, his method of working was to take up particular acts or scenes in no particular order, but as mood and instinct dictated, and then to piece them together, leaving gaps and filling them in due course. How interesting the way he approached this. Faust appears, despite the impressiveness of his project, as the very opposite of mature or perfectible. Indeed, the sharpest expression of this view would be to say that in the last stage of his career, he becomes a criminal or a madman. Nevertheless, in the paradoxical final conclusion, which many readers have found unacceptable, Faust is saved. Goethe thus adheres to his earlier salvationist plan. Goethe, who from the age of 26 had been in the service of the Duke of Saxe-Weimar, an absolute but enlightened ruler, was always strongly anti-revolutionary. But notoriously, he professed great admiration for Napoleon, yet with reservations which are also on record. The terms of the Faust-Mephistopheles wager, namely that Faust will die if he ever reaches the state of contentment, he believes to be impossible. But Goethe characteristically insists on the two-way view. Neither works nor grace can be presumed to be sufficient without the other. But grace can make good what works lack. Interesting. If you don't know, there's huge debates in theology, whether it's by works or by grace, or by works or by faith. Is it just simply by grace and we can do whatever we want, or do we need to prove our faith by works, all this kind of stuff? And I like this. It's sort of a two-way view. Neither one nor the other, but grace can make good what works lack. The key to Faust's salvation is that in Faust, he himself, an ever higher and purer activity, continues right to the end, and from on high, the eternal love coming to his aid. That's what this is citing what we read earlier in Eckermann from Goethe himself. So for Goethe, he imagines that the reason that Faust is ultimately saved is because not just the thread of good works that he puts himself to late in part two, and the righteousness that's there in his heart, however dormant, but that he never stops striving. He never gives up. That aided with the grace that Gretchen has, beckoning him from on high. So a saving grace. So it's the combination of the two working in tandem. And here's what I said. I mentioned entelechy earlier, and this comes from Aristotle. By entelechy, taken from Aristotle by Goethe. Goethe meant the spiritual energy innate in the physical self, uniting itself to the elemental substance by a process both mysterious and natural. This is, to all intents and purposes, what more popular parlance calls the soul, a word which Goethe tends to avoid. And we'll get more into the entelechy/soul later. The posthumous release of Part 2 as a whole in 1832 was a disappointment for the public. After the strong, dramatic meat of Part 1, it was now offered obscure, the public was now offered obscure, pallid allegory and, what did I put? Operatic? I underlined in such a way to obscure what that says. An operatic extravagance, the work, as it seemed to many, of an octogenarian poet who had outlived his genius. Kind of sad. But that often happens. And Goethe had a premonition that, that was probably what was going to happen. All right, so now let's get into Part 2 proper. Part 2 is composed of 5 wild acts. And the prologue with Faust, it says, lying among grass and flowers, exhausted and restless, trying to sleep at dusk. And there are spirits, graceful little shapes, hovering and circling round. And the angel Ariel is the first to sing, accompanied by, of course, Aeolian harps. But this is some beautiful lyric poetry in here. And I love this part. This is amazing. Who is this? This is Faust when he starts to come to. And the very first thing he says is, how strong and pure the pulse of life is beating. Dear earth, this night has left you still unshaken, and at my feet you breathe refreshed. My greeting to you, ethereal dawn. New joys awaken all round me at your bidding, beckoning distance. New stirring strength, new resolution taken to strive on still towards supreme existence. But then later, I love this. This is so great. And think about Goethe's deep interest in color theory. So be it. I will turn from the sun's rays. At that rock-riving torrent, with increasing ecstasy at that waterfall I gaze. From cliff to cliff it pours down never ceasing. It foams and streams 1,000,000-fold, spray upon spray high in the air releasing. But from this tumult, marvelous to behold, the rainbow blooms, changing, yet ever still. Now vanishing and now drawn clear and bold. How cool the moisture of its scattering spill. I watch a mirror here of man's whole story. And plain it speaks, ponder it as you will. Our life's a spectrum sheen of borrowed glory. I've got a good mind to just leave it at that and just walk away from Part 2. Incredible. Every time I read this, it hits me. The newly awakening Faust in these ethereal fields is looking at the waterfall and looking at the play of the light spectrum, the rainbow, that's kind of shimmering in there in the water's spill. And he makes a connection to mankind. Let's read this again. So when he says from this tumult, he's talking about the tumult of the waterfall. And oh man. But from this tumult, marvelous to behold, the rainbow blooms, changing yet ever still, now vanishing and now drawn clear and bold. How cool the moisture of its scattering spill. I watch a mirror here of man's whole story, and plain it speaks, ponder it as you will. Our life's a spectrum sheen of borrowed glory. And spectrum sheen is hyphenated. It's just beautiful. Everything is caught up in this. And, you can almost sense Goethe himself sitting by a waterfall and having this poetry come to him in his patient observation. All right, so here's Mephistopheles. Where a host of hands is busy everywhere, how could misfortune now or ill intent bring gloom to such a starry firmament? So he's playing off the old adage that idle hands are the devil's works or something like that. Like an idle mind is the devil's playground. Basically, if you're not working, putting your hands to work at something, the devil is going to come in there and lead you astray. The Mephistopheles and Faust visit the emperor and basically put on this carnival. It's this huge illusion. And I think David Lukes even says it in his introduction, but it's almost embarrassingly prolonged. And I could easily see where the carnival mask, which does go on for a pretty good while here in Act 1 of Part 2, could very well be the thing that causes people to cast Part 2 aside and say, because it gives a false representation of the whole work. It is a little bit prolonged, but they put on, this illusion of this huge carnival with all these different personages and so on to entertain the emperor and to basically assert their powers, Faust and Mephistopheles. And then they basically introduce paper money to the kingdom, which is going to stimulate the economy, and rescue the crumbling empire, but really ends up making ruins of everything. As you might surmise, yes, Goethe has in mind the actual introduction of paper money. He's thinking about the crumbling of Western Christendom. He's thinking about European economy, so on. Lots of referential stuff going on. But there's this one moment where the emperor says, "If you are lying, then I'll pack you off to hell." He says this to Mephistopheles, who then, sort of in a breaking the fourth wall, in an aside says, "I dare say I could find my own way there." So there's still that playfulness and cheekiness that comes out. Okay, then after the carnival, we get a sight. This is the emperor talking, and we see Goethe blending Western and Eastern literature. "What lucky chance has brought you here, straight out of the Arabian Nights? You need no doubt, if you can match Scheherazad's skill in storytelling, that I will grant you high favor." So it's just this whole thing where right off the bat, whereas in Part 1, Mephistopheles was, going to a drunkard's tavern and, it was more like small town stuff, right? Now we're going to like the highest courts of government. And then, of course, we're going to go beyond in cosmic realms and across time. But they're immediately getting in good. Mephistopheles is trying to pave the way to set Faust up with power, with governmental, like world power. Nonetheless, as it continues to go on, you'll have Faust saying things like, "Our sense of awe's what keeps us most alive." So nonetheless, as he's experiencing all these things that people dream of experiencing, he says, our sense of awe, and it's a contraction so that our sense of awe is what keeps us most alive. So it's interesting because hearkening back to our first meeting with Faust in his study at night when he's exhausted everything that's available to him in terms of knowledge, human knowledge, and he's turning to magic and ultimately going to kill himself because he can't achieve a divine knowledge. Here, we see him turning, right? He's now saying our sense of awe is what actually keeps us alive. Awe is not knowledge. It's sort of like the anti-knowledge. It's an ecstasy that shuts out knowledge. He's starting to realize that keeping some mystery, keeping some allure, is what gives life its spice. Mephistopheles. When lovers seek the object of their dreams, they welcome even monsters on the way. Wonderful little one-liners. Most of what I got out of this are just the little one-liners caught up, one or two liners caught up in all these things, especially the more like epigrammatic type stuff. But it's interesting, how throughout all these things, all the stuff that's going on, Faust is learning. He's developing. Here's Faust. I want no weakling's cure. I will not be like the contemptible majority. And so, again, now he's waging war against mediocrity. And so that's another way you can sort of slice Faust, is that war, that violent thrashing against mediocrity, and how a lot of us go through it. And, it can lead us to a couple different places. Complacency, of course, despair. It can cause us to do great things. And it's what is got at when we think of the men who lead quiet lives of desperation with the music still beating within them. I think that's what happens to most people after they thrash against this mediocrity. But that's just another way that you can go into Faust, is how Faust deals with mediocrity in this life. Mephistopheles. Things one was used to, they still haunt the mind. Paradise is what one has left behind. And I like this. I like pairing this with Proust, who says that the only paradises are the ones we have lost. Here, he's saying paradise is what one has left behind. They're both saying the same thing, and that they haunt the mind. But of course, this precedes Proust by like 100 years. What an absurd, this is the homunculus is here having a discussion with two ancient Greek philosophers. And the homunculus, this is wild. Hang tight. Nereus is saying, what an absurd creature man is, striving to reach divinity, yet stuck in his own image till infinity. And so we can hear the commentary on, of course, what Faust is going through, but also think about the homunculus in the jar. So the homunculus is here conversing with Nereus in a glass jar, and in my imagination anyway, the homunculus can just faintly see his own reflection, right? While he's saying this. So think about the homunculus in a glass, just seeing the faint image of his reflection, while Nereus is saying, what an absurd creature man is, striving to reach divinity, yet stuck in his own image till infinity. In a way, that's like the image in my mind of the the faint reflection of the homunculus in his glass jar is a poignant illumination of what Nereus is saying, right? And I don't know. I think there's a lot that can be done with that. And of course, the homunculus, by the way, is trying to fully achieve full sentience and mobility and so on. So it's striking at a want within the homunculus as well. Okay, in Act 3, we've got Helen. I should give a little bit of some details here and there about how the plot's progressing, but at one moment at the imperial court, they want Mephistopheles and Faust to put on another awesome show. And during that point, during that portion, Helen of Troy is resurrected, right? The face that launched 1,000 ships. And Paris and Helen are sought to be the masculine and feminine eternal beauties, right? So they're both resurrected. Well, Faust gets a glimpse of Helen and wants to go and find her. So while everything disappears on stage there at the imperial court, Faust somehow follows the mothers down into the underworld and in search of Helen. And there will be, that's what, Catabasis, right? And then I can't remember what the, not Perusia, that's the second coming, but Anabasis? Is it Catabasis and Anabasis, I think? There's a going into the underworld and then a coming up out of the underworld, which will be a poignant, an eloquent allusion to Orpheus and Eurydice. But anyway, Helen and Faust have found each other at this point, and they're talking. Helen says this to Faust. An ancient proverb proves itself in my case too. Alas, that beauty weds not long with happiness. That to me, coming somewhat in the middle, not really. That's a hard truth. Happiness and beauty wed not long together. Here in this life, if we chase after beauty, like external beauty, it's not going to satisfy for long, right? Happiness cannot be wed to beauty and be expected to last. And it's like, and again, it goes back to the term that Faust put into his wager with Mephistopheles. He had that insight into human nature to know there's nothing you can bring around there's nothing that you, Mephistopheles, can bring to me that is going to sustain, right? And Helen, who is the very highest emblem of what Mephistopheles can bring to Faust, says it right here. So it's a strong statement, and it's the key to the hedged bet of the wager. So here we go. Here's the chorus, like a Greek chorus here. We shall dwell amid this tremor of 1,000 whispering branches, tease their roots to woo the life sap softly up into the rustling. Treetops, there these floating tresses we shall deck with leaves and blossoms, in extravagant abundance, free to thrive at airy heights. And then another part of the chorus. We shall linger by these cliffs with mirror smooth, far shining faces, cling like gentle waves about them, flatter them in close caress. So to every sound we'll listen, songs of birds, the reed pipes playing. And though Pan's dread voice assail us, we shall instantly reply. And then there's a third part. Sisters, we prefer more movement. We shall hasten with the streaming waters, lured by those well-wooded hills, those ranges in the distance. And so what's happening here is the chorus is actually breaking into three sort of like levels of nature, starting with the trees and the treetops and the branches, then going and being the cliffs, mountainsides, lakes, and then finally the streams and hills and so on. It's just a neat little thing that Goethe does with the classical Greek chorus. Then in Act 4, the penultimate act, the wager is reiterated by Mephistopheles. And he says, "But let me now speak plain. Can we still offer you no earthly joy? A panoramic view confronts you. Far and wide you see unfurled the glory of the kingdoms of this world." And in parentheses, it says Matthew 4, because this is an allusion to the enemy taking Jesus up and showing him all the kingdoms of the world and offering them to him. And he says, "And can your discontentment still discern no pleasing prospect?" And so I put here, it's important to note that thus Gretchen and Helen have failed in this life. And then we move to the final act here, Mephistopheles and Faust. And Faust says, "Those few trees not my own spoil the whole world that is my throne. This is the sharpest torment. What a rich man feels he has not got." Now, what he's doing, he's looking out and he's seeing all this stuff. At this point, he pretty much owns them, runs the world. Okay, and he's seeing this one little house and these trees and this old couple living there, and it's the one thing he doesn't own. And in his fleshly heart, I think he does realize that, like, this is a blight on his power and prestige, and he wants to own that too, right? But at the same time, his spiritual man is recognizing, like he says, this is the sharpest torment. What a rich man feels he has not got. So suddenly he realized, it's like he recognizes that no matter what we have, we'll always want more. When you're given endless riches, you start to totally overlook what it is you have, and you can only focus on what you don't have. And so you can read this in two ways, because it's actually happening in two ways. You can read it as the just greed-stricken, power-hungry tyranny coming out of him, but also what is the final despair in the earthly human duality of Faust. And so finally, he is struck blind by a personification of care. And he comes to a sort of final renunciation of Mephistopheles. He says, "A dark and hollow sound, a ghostly sight. I have not broken through to freedom yet. I must clear magic from my path, forget all magic conjurations, for then I would be confronting nature all alone. Man's life worthwhile, man standing on his own. So it was once before I probed the gloom and dared to curse myself with words of doom that curse the world. The air is swarming now with ghosts we would avoid if we knew how. How logical and clear the daylight seems, till the night weaves us in its web of dreams." And so finally he's come to a point where, nothing satisfies. And I don't know if I took note of these. Yeah. Okay. So continuing with Faust, let me jump to this first. "And this, as wisdom's final word, I teach, only that man earns freedom, merits life, who must reconquer both in constant daily strife. And so he still has not found joy, peace, and satisfaction in life with the things that Mephistopheles has paraded in front of him and given him. And so in that way, Mephistopheles has lost the bet in heaven, right? But then, I think, okay, here it is. Okay. Faust then says, I long to see that multitude and stand with a free people on a free land. Then to that moment I might say, beautiful moment, do not pass away. Till many ages shall have passed, this record of my earthly life shall last. And in anticipation of such bliss, what moment could give me greater joy than this? And then the stage direction is that Faust sinks back, the lemur sees him and lay him on the ground. And so he dies. He dies in that moment. But what he says what he claims here, though, is the moment that he could live in forever and never want to let go of, is that everyone were free through this wisdom that he has gleaned. And this is a righteous and noble path that has nothing to do with what Mephistopheles offered. So then Mephistopheles says, this last poor empty moment he would seize, content with nothing else beside. How he resisted me, but in the end, time wins. So here you lie, my senile friend. The clock has stopped. They fall. All is fulfilled. All is over now. So by Mephistopheles' account, time has won the wager. In other words, such a wager, this is where it really gets interesting to me. In other words, from Mephistopheles' view, he won the wager because such a wager cannot outpace eternity. In other words, such a wager could never be satisfied inside of time, if that makes sense. Because it's another way of looking at it, I guess, is that Faust hedged his bet with something that was impossible. Because of this insight into the human heart. And yet, because because he couldn't achieve this hedge within time, within this life, he could only achieve it in his heart. And God weighs the heart, whereas man and Mephistopheles weigh the actions. And that is why ultimately Faust was saved. But it could be a great study, and I'm sure there's one out there. I just didn't seek it out. But it would be a great study to look at both wagers, the wager in heaven and the wager on earth, and from all the different perspectives. So the wager in heaven and earth, but also from all of their perspectives, from the Lord's perspective, Mephistopheles, Faust, and of course, Gretchen. Here we are, Mephistopheles talking now after Faust's death. Things are no longer what they were. Traditional custom, the old rules inspire no confidence now. There's nothing one can trust. In former times, a man would breathe his last, out popped the soul as quick as any mouse, and snap, my waiting claws would close on it. But nowadays, it hesitates to quit this gloomy corpse, its dark, disgusting house, till in the end the elements at strife drive out the wretched scrap of life. So there's this satanic skepticism, and the devil is here lamenting that people have sort of stopped believing in him. And I think that this is, Goethe has in mind some stuff coming out of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution and so on. And the Romantics, coming out of German Romanticism, that is to say, the genesis of the Romantics, were very wary of the death of the spiritual life. So now the chorus of angels, it says that they soar upwards, carrying Faust's immortal part. And that would be linked to the entelechy for Goethe. Now, there are three divine women here, one of whom is the Virgin Mary, but one of whom is the Una Poenitentium, and it says once known as Gretchen. And Gretchen presses in and actually addresses the Virgin Mary and says, "Virgin and Mother, thou, Lady beyond compare, O thou who art full of glory, bow thy face in mercy to my great joy now. He whom I loved, oh see, he is undarkened, he comes back to me." And she basically, asks for him to be brought up there. And the Mater Gloriosa says, "Come, into higher spheres outreach him. He must sense you to find the way." So again, Gretchen has become a Beatrice to Faust's Dante. And the other women around her, holy women around her, are saying, you need to keep slightly out of reach. Your grace will draw him, which is all the more interesting. Like, what is Goethe getting at here? But I want to say, don't be afraid of part two. I really think it's that kind of prolonged carnival mask in Act One that I think throws a lot of people off. Maybe press on, maybe skip that and go on and see what you think. But you need both. I think you can read part one and then maybe leave part two until later, but to round it out, you've gotta have both. And to get at the complexities of the double wagers and the way that everything's depicted, it is really worth it. It's really worth the journey. So now let's dig in a little bit deeper with Goethe's Faust, 7 essays by Alan P. Cottrell. And just in general, there is outstanding textual analysis in here. In many instances, Cottrell speaks as if he is analyzing not just a piece of writing, but a symphony and a painting too. And it really shows, again, what an effect Goethe's Italian journeys had on him, especially in terms of his botany. He contributed a lot. He contributed a lot to botany, including morphology and to art. And it shows how tightly coupled the braiding was between his work in natural science and his art, and especially how they're interwoven into Faust. I would say that the emerging qualities of Goethe's intellectual approach to life are once again brought out here, and that being totality and integration, but also balance. So yeah, let's move on in here. Whoops. From the introduction, not everyone who feels moved to indict Goethe's worldview is capable of comprehending it. It's pretty strong. Not everyone who feels moved to indict Goethe's worldview is capable of comprehending it. So, most people are quick to write this very subtly complex character off without even understanding what he's getting at. There were prominent figures in the 19th century, such as Hermann Grimm, Carlyle, and above all, Emerson, who understood and honored Goethe, yet their voices were not easily heard through the clamor of triumphant materialism. In many instances, I have tried to develop a theme through very close textual analysis, often down to the syntax and the vowel consonant structures. For Faust is not philosophy, but high poetry, and it is rewarding to trace the embodiment of Goethe's vision in the language, the poetic diction, the Sprachleib. Faust, above all other poems, depicts the struggles of modern Western men for spiritual autonomy and self-determination. Goethe was the father of plant morphology, yet few understood the non-Kantian epistemological mode which informs it, and the Farbenlehre, the theory of colors, which Goethe himself considered his greatest achievement, is still the object of controversy, or worse, the victim of indifference. Blah, blah, blah. He cites Murray, John Middleton Murray, about Goethe, and he says, he was asserting a truth in his rejection of the Newtonian theory of light, the truth of the incommensurability of the immediately apprehended phenomenon, which science has been ever since in danger of neglecting. This attitude of Goethe's is so far from being outmoded that it belongs still to the future. So that is to say that a lot of things that were cast off, like I said earlier, especially in terms of his theory of colors, notable people have recently even said that science hasn't caught up with this in its acceptance of it to understand what Goethe is really getting at. And so much around it has really prompted me to add it to my reading list. I had never had an interest in reading it before. I knew of it. I knew of its importance to Goethe, but I don't know, never really spoke to me. But the more I've read around it now, the more I want to read it. All right, so the first essay is Chalice and Skull, a Goethean answer to Faust's cognitional dilemma. In the night scene with Faust, we see a chalice of poison and the skull, which symbolize his escape from the restrictive life and the mystery of the prison that contains us, that being a skull. Faust contemplates the barrier between natural human life and the supernatural life. The chalice and the skull are objects both constructed by artists. And this is where Cottrell uses that poem that Goethe wrote about on seeing Schiller's skull. On a deeper level, the skull's metaphorical function is determined by the context of the scene itself. The time is the dawn of Easter, the festival commemorating the triumph of spirit over matter following the events of Golgotha, the place of the skull, which is what Golgotha means, and was so named because it kind of looked like a skull. I've been to what at least Constantine's mother, or Justinian's mother, Helena, cited as what she thinks is Golgotha there around Jerusalem. And you have to really kind of look at it and use your imagination to see the skull-like formation. I personally only kind of noticed it. Anyway, really cool connection there that I don't think I would have made between that skull and the Easter bells and Golgotha, the place of the skull. Goethe found himself reborn in Italy. Standing before the works of classical art, he recognized in them a free, further development by man of the same organic laws which inform the world of nature. Goethe, in short, had begun so to school his thinking that he could apply it to the phenomena of nature and of art, and in so doing participate in and thus also know their hidden spiritual laws. That's where I think modern thinkers draw the line with someone like Goethe. He might have been like one of the last spiritual giants of art. But he had that mystical side where he felt that if he spent enough time in contemplation, he could penetrate down to these spiritual laws of things. In the skull which he holds in his hands, he perceives the vessel formed by the creative forces of nature as the earthly home of the entelechy and of his friend Schiller. So the skull for him is just this man-made carapace that contains something that defies humanity, that transcends humanity, yet is contained by it. And that paradox fascinated him. And I think that's echoed also in the homunculus and the jar. Goethe could not accept religion as it was presented by the churches of his day, but for him, both science and art, properly conceived, contain within them the true being of religion. All right, in the second essay, it's called Metamorphoses of Nature and of Man in Faust. This shows a striking connection between Goethe's discoveries in botany and his morphological mode in poetry. Goethe uses the metamorphosis of Helen's Trojan women into elemental spirits of nature to highlight how Goethe, that was Cottrell in this essay. Sorry, it's been a few weeks since I've read it. Cottrell uses the metamorphosis of Helen's Trojan women into elemental spirits of nature to highlight how Goethe captures these four metamorphoses in the specific language and sounds he uses in the original German. And I didn't say it when I was reading it, but towards the end of Faust Part 2, when I said that one element of the chorus personified the trees and then the streams, the mountains, and so on, that's what he's talking about. Those were Helen's Trojan women, and they had been metamorphosed into elements of nature. The leaves, stalks, blossoms, seeds, the aspect which the plants present the eye in space, if perceived in its protean flux as wirkende Natur, in time, reveals the music of an invisible spirit chorus. The chorus of Trojan women who have formed the retinue of Helen choose, after her death, not to return to Hades, but rather to translate themselves into elemental spirits of nature. In the first instance, Goethe, the morphologist, describes the plant metamorphoses step by step and points to a sacred chorus of life which resounds to him from within. And in the second, Goethe, the poet, presents us the reverse process in strangely haunting imagery. The chanting chorus, visible on the stage, gradually slips into the elements of nature which it will help to animate from within. That's brilliant. Which is a brilliant reading. For Goethe, nature and art are inwardly related. The artist creates according to the same laws which inform nature. And I do think that Goethe believed this, that the highest thing that you can do as a man is become a poet and create something, create your poetry. Because in this, you are mirroring the laws of the natural world and thus becoming one with it. Thus, the plant's life cycle, which we saw portrayed in the imagery of this passage, is reflected in the use of sounds, from the hard earth-like consonants through the sap-like flow of the L to the metamorphosis into leaves, and finally carried by the vowels into the even more refined blossoms. And yes, even though I skipped over it all, he really gets in there and, like, with a pair of tweezers, picks apart the little sounds and the almost like encoding of these sounds and how they embody at the phoneme level what's being presented in the content. It's amazing. It's a great, great read. And like a really inspiring work of criticism, literary criticism. Goethe was a very exact observer, of natural phenomena, and his poetic use of language is correspondingly exact. Goethe the scientist, Goethe the poet. The two are one in Goethe the thinker. All right, then essay 3, The Song of Lynceus. And this again is another it's a stunning textual analysis of this passage. This is Faust's night watchman, who sings from a balcony above Faust way late in the game when Faust is looking from his castle out over everything that the dominion that Mephistopheles has given him. But this is amazing. For Goethe, the world of colors as deeds and sufferings of light is intimately related to the eye. For the eye is creative. It continually produces inwardly the complementary after-image of the color seen. But more importantly, the colors are themselves a universe both sensory and moral. So colors have morals in Goethe's color theory. They partake of both the physical and the spiritual. The creative human eye is the mediator of this awesome process. And so this poem of Lynceus's contains 16 lines. The first 8 speak primarily of the sensory world, the external world of nature, the objects perceived by the eye in nature. The last 8 speak of the moral sphere, the inner experiences engendered by that contemplation, the eternal harmonies of the world, the soul's acceptance of what it has seen. Thus, the two primary qualities which for Goethe inform the world of color come into clear focus through the form of the poem. Amazing. Moreover, the metrical foot, the amphibrach, a stressed syllable between two unstressed syllables. So, what am I doing? Short, long, short. Neither hastens nor retards the flow of the lines. It sustains a mood of perfect balance, corresponding to the balance of outer and inner worlds that comes to expression in the poem's content. The rhyme scheme divides the poem into 4 stanzas of 4 lines each. It is a simple progression of interlocking couplets, A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, H, I, H. For easy reference, we shall follow the precedent of another critic in referring to these as stanzas. We note that the final 4 lines contain a flaw in the rhyme, that GHIH instead of GHGH. We shall return to this presently. The poem celebrates man's faculty of sight, and it abounds in references to his faculty. And he gives a bunch of German words instead of the translations, which I'll try to do. The Sehen, the Schauen, Blick, Augen, Gessen. Yet it is at the same time a little autobiography. The central theme develops its levels of meaning as the life story unfolds. Just a brilliant analysis of that. Within that poem, there's this one moment, the Die Aviga Sia. Die Ewiga Sia. D-I-E, D, Ewiga, E-W-I-G-E, and then Sia, Z-I-E-R, Die Ewige Sia. In keeping, and it's translated usually as the eternal ornament. In keeping with Goethe's classical worldview and the Greek name Lynceus of the person singing this poem, scholars are in general agreement that the German Sia is here best understood as a rendering of the Greek cosmos. The word cosmos means both order and ornament, for to the Greek, both were expression of the same reality. The beautiful order and the precisely ordered form of beauty. And as if by design, the vowel pattern of this crucial line in the poem, Die ewige Zier, reflects in its microcosmic structure the symmetry and harmony of the macrocosmic order of which it speaks. And he draws out that vowel pattern, which is I-E, E, I, E, I-E. No other line in the poem contains such a perfectly balanced vocalic structure. Here, the poet's seeing has indeed become an envisioning, and he is able to incorporate the transcendent symmetry and ordered beauty of his vision into the medium of language. But there is yet another dimension to this pattern, for if one renders the same vowels in phonetic symbols as they are pronounced, the following sequence emerges. And I don't know how to pronounce these exactly, but I'll just do it to give you a sense of what he's getting at. I, E, E. The visible structure is here broken through by a slight tonal metamorphosis, which breathes life into the otherwise perfectly symmetrical and therefore beautiful but dead form. This line, then, stands within the poem as the representative of that perfectly ordered and beautiful Greek universe which has revealed itself to Lynceus's outwardly and inwardly active eye. And while the little cosmos of the line's vowel pattern presents to the reader's eye an aspect harmonious and balanced but static, it tells the ear that this coldly beautiful exterior is but its surface. From within, it is alive. Amazing. I mean, incredible. This one, that analysis blew me, absolutely blew me away. And then towards the end, we get more into a little bit of what Faust means by his appropriation of Aristotle's entelechy. It is the potential for good lies slumbering within man. This is the deepest level of meaning of the daimon, the possibility for man to become what he has within him as potential. So the true home of the spiritual potential of Faust's entelechy reveals itself after his death in the final scene. But for the moment, Faust is still seriously entangled in the forces of his earthly destiny. The fourth of the 7 essays, the theme of sacrifice and the question of Faust's redemption. So this is the ending / redemption is both Christian and Goethean. It is a matter of, our salvation is a matter of striving and of having a spiritual mediator. And there are many sacrifices along the way, but Gretchen's is the unique case. It kicks off with this. Perhaps the most difficult question confronting the reader of Goethe's Faust is that of Faust's ultimate redemption. Goethe had originally intended to include a scene depicting a heavenly court of judgment over Faust, including Christ as well as the evangelists and saints. But Goethe abandoned this rather legalistically conceived treatment in favor of one more in keeping with his own belief in slow, organic transformation and ennoblement. The two aspects of Faust's redemption, man's own active striving and the activity of super-sensible beings who affect his salvation. Again, Gretchen in this case. We all need someone praying for us. That's what Goethe is saying. Goethe acknowledged and admired the truth revealed in the various religions. The Old Testament was a favorite book from childhood, and the wisdom of the Near East finds expression in the efforts of his later works, the West Österlicher Divan. Whether it was these religions, the Greek mysteries, or the sun worship of ancient Persia, Goethe sought in each the workings of the divine worlds. Kind of reminds me of Tolstoy and the calendar of wisdom that he ultimately put together from all of his gleanings. The famous monologue in which Faust describes his compulsion to destroy Gretchen's world dates from the Faust. That was the sort of original legend, is referred to as the Faust. Its Sturm und Drang language embodies directly the message of uncontrolled erotic drives through which Mephisto's cynical needling have taken possession of Faust's consciousness. Gretchen is to be sacrificed to this desire. So the sacrifice of the Virgin is certainly nothing new in literature. All right. Essay 5. Man's power revealed in the poet. Des Menschenkraft im Dichter offenbart. Thoughts on the sources of poetic creativity in view of Goethe's image of man. So just some summary statements I put at the top. This compares B.F. Skinner's conception of a poet as a passive locus for incubating poems to Goethe's view of poetic creation. Skinner wanted to abolish the notion of the genius, but Goethe revered the creative genius. For Goethe, one must exercise certain cognitive faculties in order to activate higher organs of sense perception. Goethe's concept of genius has an egalitarian constraint, though, in that it is latent in all. In that it is latent in all of us. So it's nurture, not nature, for Goethe. So it is in all of our nature to achieve and activate this genius. We have the organs of genius within us, but through nurture, well, we can achieve it. Faust is itself a documentation of Goethe's lifelong struggle to achieve ever greater clarity of insight into the humanity of man, particularly of modern Western man, in his struggle for self-determination and for spiritual autonomy. Goethe was particularly shattered by the news of Byron's death, for he saw in the English poet a reflection of the gifted young man that he had once been himself. The surging power, self-confidence, idealism, and spontaneity which had characterized the storm and stress period, the early Sessenheim poems, the great hymns, and the elemental fire of Werther and Goetz. These forces of creativity often broke forth with such power that Goethe felt he had little or no conscious control of them. Awakening in the night, he often felt carried by an unfathomed surge of inspiration and struggled to capture it on paper. One thinks of what we read in Graham Robb's biography of Victor Hugo, who used to complain about the nuisance of his uncontrollable poetic faculties constantly at work. Nature and love are two streams which fed Goethe's poetic genius throughout his life. They flow through his great poem on the struggles of modern man, Faust, and in a deep sense they underlie his efforts in the scientific fields. The poet possessed a spark of divine life which he could kindle to a bright flame. Goethe was fascinated throughout his life by this very element in man, the eternally active, incalculable, unpredictable force of the self. He later often referred to it as das Daimonisch. I don't know how to pronounce it very well in German, but it gets at the Greek daimon. And in his last years, he refined and purified the concept and called it by the Aristotelian term, entelechy, the being having its goal, or telos, in itself. These, meaning the poet, the director, and the actor in the prologue in the theater, these, says Goethe, are the three ingredients, the triad of forces which are necessary if a work of art is to be brought from the world of inspiration into its physical incorporation in the theater. And so, there's a practical element too. In Representative Men, Emerson describes the second the role of unceasing toil with specific reference to Goethe. And this is quoting Emerson. The cheerful laborer, with no external popularity or provocation, drawing his motive and his plan from his own breast, tasked himself with stints for a giant. And without relaxation or rest, except by alternating his pursuits, worked on for 80 years with the steadiness of his first zeal. For Goethe, there are always two sides to all phenomena, especially in the life sciences, the external and the internal. The spiritual archetype of the plant is not equal to the sum total of the conditions necessary for the plant's manifestation in the world. If, in the Goethean and Emersonian view, there is a higher reality in the activity of thinking, why do many scientists today not acknowledge it? Goethe's unequivocal answer is that in not having developed the necessary organ, Emerson's corresponding faculty, they do not experience a higher reality. For every experience, man must develop the requisite organ of cognition. So, I mean, this is really something, it sounds crazy to us these days, but this was really something Goethe believed in very deeply, that there were these organs of sense within us that had to be nurtured and activated to be able to achieve a higher level of thinking. And without doing that, we were very limited. The Romanticists looked back at it longingly and hoped to find ways to regain the lost sense of divine animation in nature and in man. So they kind of like this is the ancient concept of the muse, but also getting at, again, like I said, the Romantics, looking back at the classical period, especially when there was a spiritual or supernatural dimension, let's say. For the day of the single genius who gives his name to an age is also largely a thing of the past, Cottrell says. And Goethe emblematized that. Yet he already recognized that solutions will only be forthcoming when men call forth the qualities of genius latent in every man and woman and apply them in concert to the high task at hand. All right, the Zoilotercites, another sehr ernster Scherch in Goethe's Faust II. What in the world does any of that mean, you ask? Well, the Zoilotercites is a character that in Faust Part 2 that Goethe made up, and he mashed together Zoilus, who was a harsh critic of Homer's, and Thersites, a character from the Iliad who is ugly and abusive and eventually killed by Achilles for his mocking. So this is Goethe's great joke in pairing those two together. We're looking at this interesting fleeting minor character, and again, a creation of Goethe's from two, one real critic and then one a character from the author that the critic is criticizing, and shows the central connections to Helen. The tension of dualities and polarities throughout Faust are treated in this essay. The placement of the Helen act within the entire poem. And again, the Helen act, the Helena, was the only one that was published as a standalone ahead of the whole thing. The importance attributed by German classicism to the aesthetic education of man as that sphere of experience which brings into balance the various sides of human nature. In Schiller's book on the aesthetic education of man, he expressed in philosophical terms the central function of the aesthetic as it mediates between the physical and the spiritual. Similarly, the central position which Goethe assigns to the figure of Helen reflects the importance attributed to the aesthetic experience in the harmonious development of the human personality. der Mensch, as an ideal of German classicism. And then he talks about the image of the egg is evoked as a mythical recollection of the origin of beauty. And it's notable that the Oxford World Classics edition of Faust Part 2 has this painting by Correggio, and it's a detail from Leda and the Swan, because the way that Helen came about was that while Leda and her maidens were bathing, Zeus took the form of a swan and seduced her in her bath, and then Helen was born from an egg. He notes how central metamorphosis was to Goethe's worldview. And so it's no wonder that, the ancient classics, Greek and Roman, were so close to him, and the Arabian Nights to a degree, because of the insistence, especially by Ovid, on metamorphosis. The organic relationship of art and nature through inherent developmental laws shared by both is the cornerstone of the classical ethics of Goethe since the Italian journey. And so once again, that Italian journey was certainly changed his life. And we get to where he's treating Mephistopheles wearing a dual mask here. He says, as part of this, for Zoilus was the pedantic belittler of Homer, the latter a demigod by virtue of his quasi-anonymous, nearly mythological frame, while Thersites is the uncharitable companion of the Greeks, demigods by virtue of their heroic deeds as celebrated by the poet. Sorry, I read my little note before I read the excerpt. But in addition to this dual nature that Goethe has contrived here, we also note that in these scenes, Mephistopheles is wearing a dual mask. He's got multiple personas, and he's doing some cloaking of his own at this point in the Faust. That these themes are cruelly distorted in the make-believe world of the mask is quite in keeping with Mephistopheles' desire to make a mockery of just those deeper mysteries of man's soul, which are too important for him to ignore, and that would be the duality of man. Mephistopheles wants Faust to believe that man is only one way, and that is only governed by his flesh. This principle, whereby a theme once introduced reveals in full content only in the further course of the play, is a basic aesthetic law which can be observed throughout the Faust. And that reminds me of how Michael Silverblatt articulated the fractal structure of Infinite Jest when he says that, a theme or a story is introduced in small and then picks up later and grows. The same device is used here. All right, and finally, the last essay in here, Faust's blindness and the inner light. Some questions for the future. Because Faust does become blind. I think I said care personified blinds him. And of course, reading something like this, blindness is, for me at least, is going to instantly trigger Homer and Milton. And who was it I was reading that got really excited that they might have gone blind? Oh, again, it was Victor Hugo. Almost got excited. He used to stare at the sun for prolonged periods so that he could play with the after images that he would see. And he got excited when he was told he might go blind because he felt that this was his way of joining those ethereal ranks. Gretchen's total surrender to Faust has brought her into disastrous conflict with the laws of society. Yet the love she has given him transcends the flames of passion. It is deeply spiritual. Faust's conscience awakens in the orgy of the Walpurgisnacht, for the love which is Gretchen's great gift to him shines within his entelechy, and in one of the darkest hours opens the inner eye to her impending passion and death. Wow. It's like, it's like I kind of knew some of that was going on, but I couldn't express it so eloquently. And that's why I turn to scholars, criticism, things like that. So thank you for that, Mr. Cottrell. From earliest childhood, Goethe possessed an extraordinary power to envision inwardly what he learned. The stories told him by his mother, and particularly the world of the Old Testament, lived vividly in his imagination. During the Frankfurt illness, he exercised these faculties in a powerful new way through the study of the mystical, theosophical, and alchemical works brought to him by Zsuzsanna von Klettenberg. Mystical symbols and cosmic visions filled his consciousness and later found incorporation in the opening scenes of Faust. All of these experiences in Goethe's biography served gradually to prepare him to make the investigations which led to the later creation of what he considered to be his most significant work, the Farbenlehre. Sorry if I'm butchering that pronunciation. Farbenlehre, the theory of colors. Two streams of activity in particular flow through Goethe's biography and find expression in that work. One is the painstaking observation of the outer phenomena of nature. The other is the inward, mystical interest kindled during the Frankfurt illness. And still talking about the theory of colors here. The light calls forth the human eye through the process of evolution in order that the inner light may emerge and meet the outer. This is a tremendous open secret of the Faust poem. The entelechy of man bears the same relationship to divine love which the eye of man bears to the light. It has often been observed that Goethe's work is at every turn an expression of his biography. His life and work are intimately related. This is perhaps the reason why, in reading Goethe, one has such a powerful impression of the living being of its creator. And what a wonderful place to end with that. So, in conclusion, I know one thing. My next step is to read his theory of colors and then go back to Faust with that insight in mind, because I'm thoroughly convinced that it's wrapped up in there, and that a truth that he hit on in the theory of colors is a truth that he labors to express in poetry through Faust.